Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Lisa Holm. Lisa Holm was born on February 7, 1998 in a small town in Sweden. It is a peaceful place where she lives with her parents and older sister. Lisa is a kind, positive, and determined person. Even before finishing her studies, she decided that she wanted to go to Australia to study architecture. Lisa has also had a lot of experience traveling with her family, visiting many other countries. In the summer of 2015, when Lisa turned 17, she finally found her first job at a cafe about a 40-minute drive from home. During the first few weeks, her parents still drove her to work. However, not long after, her father decided to buy her a scooter so that she could get around on her own. Lisa had this type of driver's license before she turned 18, which is the age required to apply for a car driver's license. She was very happy to receive this gift because it was an opportunity for her to go to work by herself without having to rely on others. However, in the first few weeks, her father still accompanied her by car because Lisa lacked experience driving on the road. She only worked on weekends, and her father accompanied her every morning and evening. This habit continued until June 7th, when he finally allowed her to drive herself to the cafe. Around lunchtime, her parents decided to visit her at work and have lunch together. That day, the cafe was quite crowded, so Lisa was very busy with work. She took a short break to have lunch with her parents, then they returned home. At 6:23 p.m., Lisa sent a text message to her father saying that she was coming home. Just 3 minutes later, her father received a call from Lisa, but no one answered. He heard some voices in the background and thought that Lisa had accidentally called his number while talking to her colleague. He also heard the sound of a car door closing. He called Lisa's name several times, but no one answered. Then, he ended the call and started waiting for her to come home. However, she did not appear. After an hour, Lisa's parents began to worry. They thought something might have happened to her on the way since she should have arrived by now. This was the first time she had ridden a scooter alone, and her father was very concerned about her safety. He tried calling her several times, but Lisa's phone was turned off. After waiting for a while, her father decided to set off, hoping to meet Lisa on the way because she could have taken the shortest route. Her father was afraid that Lisa might have had an accident, so he drove carefully, paying attention to the road but did not see his daughter. Finally, he went to the cafe but could not find Lisa. When he arrived at her workplace, he noticed that Lisa's scooter was parked in front of the building. At that moment, he panicked because he could not find his daughter despite having come all this way. When he saw her scooter, he immediately calmed down, thinking that maybe she was just late for work for some reason. However, there was no one in the cafe, and he noticed something else. Lisa's scooter key was still in the ignition, with a helmet dangling from the handle. These things made him believe that something was wrong with his daughter. She would never leave the key in the scooter while leaving it unattended in the parking lot. Meanwhile, Lisa's mother contacted the cafe owner, hoping to find clues about her daughter's whereabouts. However, the cafe owner claimed that he did not know where Lisa was. According to the cafe owner, Lisa had called the staff around 6 p.m. and they told her that they were closing the cafe. After the call from Lisa's mother, the cafe owner immediately got in his car and went to the cafe. On the way, the cafe owner also contacted 4 friends who lived nearby, asking them to help find Lisa. When the cafe owner arrived, they began searching both the cafe and the surrounding area. They hoped that Lisa might have decided to take the bus instead of the scooter. Lisa's mother and sister drove to the bus station in their town to check the schedule. Unfortunately, Lisa was not on the bus. Her family immediately contacted the police. It was dark. The police quickly expanded the search. The fact that Lisa's motorbike was left in the parking lot with the keys made them consider the possibility that Lisa had been kidnapped. Such incidents are quite rare in Sweden, especially in the remote rural area where she lived. Therefore, the police quickly mobilized teams with sniffer dogs, while other officers began knocking on doors near the cafe. When Lisa's classmates and friends learned about her missing, they shared information about the case on social media, hoping to attract more attention and find witnesses. The search went on all night but yielded no results. On Monday morning, the police department announced Lisa's missing to the public and asked anyone with information to come forward. At the same time, a man working in a warehouse across the street from the cafe found a motorcycle glove on the floor and reported it to the police. Detectives had checked the warehouse the night Lisa went missing but did not find the glove. They later showed the glove to Lisa's parents, who confirmed that it belonged to their daughter. This further strengthened the theory that Lisa had been kidnapped, and the police intensified their search efforts. By that time, news of Lisa's missing had captured the nation's attention, and hundreds of volunteers had joined the search. On Tuesday, the police received some alarming new leads. Volunteers searched the area around a dirt road a few hundred yards from the cafe. During the investigation of the crime scene, investigators collected several pieces of evidence related to Lisa, including a phone case, a receipt, a ticket, and a broken smartphone screen. They later found other parts of the smartphone, Lisa's ID card, and several other receipts scattered along the dirt road. This evidence made the police almost certain that Lisa had been kidnapped. They mobilized every available resource for the search, and the number of participants grew. The case became a major news topic in Sweden, and hundreds of volunteers from across the country joined the search. A local missing persons organization also joined the effort. The scale of the search for Lisa became the largest in the country's modern history, with more than 1,000 people involved in total. The police received numerous calls from people with information about Lisa's missing. One woman reported that before Lisa went missing, she had gone jogging. While she was jogging, a man standing next to his car stopped her and asked for directions to a city she had never heard of. He spoke to her in English. She tried to give him directions using Google Maps, but he asked her to get in his car and show him the way using his navigation device. The woman found this request suspicious, so she refused and continued walking. She also told the police that she believed she had seen the man among the workers repairing a warehouse across from the cafe. Lisa's co-workers shared a testimony with the police. On the day of her missing, a witness noticed two men standing across from the coffee shop, looking in the direction of where she worked. The witness didn't think much of it at the time, but after Lisa went missing, they decided to share it with the police. The next day, Wednesday, Lisa's father and some friends searched the dirt road where her belongings had been found the day before. When they went a little further, they found Lisa's driver's license and house keys. This suggested that Lisa may have been abducted and forced to leave the coffee shop via this road. Her kidnapper may have thrown her belongings out of the car or other vehicle they used to abduct her. Police and volunteers focused their efforts in this area, but no other items were found. That evening, a friend of Lisa's father was returning home from his search. As he passed the coffee shop, he noticed that the police had left the warehouse where Lisa's gloves were found. The man decided to go inside the coffee shop to look for any other clues. This time, he used his car's flashlight to walk around the premises since it was dark. While there, he noticed a shiny object lying on the floor. Upon closer inspection, he realized it was a pair of women's earrings. The man later reported this to the police, who showed the earrings to Lisa's parents. They confirmed that the jewelry belonged to their daughter. The police then sealed off the shed and conducted a more thorough inspection. The lead detective explained that on the first day of the search for Lisa, the priority was to find her, so the shed had not been fully inspected, and they may have missed small items such as earrings. After conducting an in-depth investigation, forensic experts and sniffer dogs were called in. They discovered a remarkable piece of evidence hidden behind a wall, which was traces of human feces. Although it seemed unrelated to the case, forensic experts developed an hypothesis regarding it. When criminals commit serious and horrifying crimes, their bodies secrete a large amount of adrenaline, which can lead them to be unable to control their urge to urinate. This often happens to murderers, who frequently urinate before or during the crime. Based on the discovery of Lisa's gloves and earrings in the warehouse area, the police hypothesized that if she had been kidnapped, the perpetrator might have dragged her into this building. Therefore, detectives did not rule out the possibility that the kidnapper may have consumed a large amount of adrenaline, leading to an inability to control himself and necessitating urination at the scene. Consequently, fecal samples were taken and sent for DNA analysis. On Friday, the search area was expanded, and volunteers went to a farm about 3.2 kilometers from the cafe. This farm complex consisted of large buildings where many people worked. The search team decided to check the entire area. However, after they arrived, two men appeared at the farm. They spoke no Swedish and only communicated in English. One of them claimed that the police had come to the farm to check on them. But the leader of the search party did not believe him, as he thought he would be notified if it were true. So he decided to continue searching. The two men walked around the farm, observing for a while before driving away. After about an hour, the search team discovered a pile of branches behind the cowshed. Upon closer inspection, they found a motorcycle helmet, jacket, and headphones. Police quickly arrived on the scene and confirmed that these items belonged to Lisa. They then sent forensic experts to the farm to conduct a more thorough investigation. The detectives heard stories about two strange men who tried to stop volunteers from checking the farm. The police also recalled a report about a woman who had encountered a man acting suspiciously while jogging and who spoke English. In fact, they had some idea of his identity from the very beginning of the search. They visited the houses surrounding the cafe. In one of the houses, two Lithuanian brothers lived with the wife of one of them. All three of them spoke no Swedish and communicated only in English. They were the only people within a few miles who did not speak the local language. The police also had other indirect reasons to suspect them. The brothers worked at the warehouse across the street from the cafe and at the farm where Lisa's helmet was found. They were familiar with these locations and the road leading to their house. Since there were no other suspects, the police decided to question all three of them. Forensic experts, along with volunteers, went to the farm to continue the investigation. They noticed an old trailer, surrounded by tall grass, that looked like it hadn't been used in years. However, the grass around the door was flattened, indicating that something had been there recently. In addition, the grass under the door was also matted down, indicating that the door had not been opened for a long time. When the forensic experts opened the door, they were immediately hit by a strong stench of decay. Inside the trailer were several wardrobes, most of which had previously been used as changing rooms for workers. All but one were locked, leading experts to suspect that Lisa's body might be in one of them. They began opening each one and eventually discovered Lisa's body in an open cupboard, hidden behind a pile of old clothes and rags. Despite the small size of the cupboard, the perpetrator had managed to squeeze the victim inside. Lisa had been tied up with a rope around her neck and duct tape wrapped around her head. Her pants had been pulled down, and her shirt had been pulled up. Medical experts determined that Lisa had died from strangulation, but no signs of sexual assault were found. All of her clothes were turned over to the lab for testing. As news of the discovery of her body spread rapidly across the country, headlines in Sweden focused on Lisa's abduction. When her body was found and the public learned of her brutal murder, the incident shocked the entire nation. since such crimes are extremely rare in Sweden. Everyone was taken aback that someone could commit such a brutal act. On the same day her body was discovered, something unusual and quite strange happened. A YouTube user came across a video posted 13 days before the murder, titled 13, which had a countdown timer. The most disturbing detail was that the name of the channel that posted the video was Lisa. News of this video quickly spread across the media, leaving many people stunned by the coincidence. Some began to speculate that someone had predicted the murder, but the truth was much simpler. Someone had likely changed the channel name and video title after discovering Lisa's body. This could have been to suggest another conspiracy theory or just a cruel joke. The police are trying their best to quickly find the culprit in this murder. When Lisa's body was discovered, investigators brought in the owners of the farm, Narigis Belavicius, his brother and his brother's wife, for questioning. However, all of them denied any involvement in the case. They claimed that at the time of the kidnapping, they were at home together to provide each other with an alibi. According to their story, Narigis was sleeping in his room while his wife was preparing dinner and Narigis' brother was on the computer. Around 8 p.m., Narigis woke up and went to the gas station to buy pizza and cigarettes. The police had some doubts about the testimony of them, as they might have been protecting each other. Although the police collected their DNA samples, investigators still did not find direct evidence linking them to the murder case. Forensic experts worked diligently at relevant locations, such as the barn and the farm, using all available resources and manpower, and their efforts finally paid off. In the barn area, there was a small room resembling an office, with a large window overlooking the cafe. When examining this room, experts discovered 15 different male semen stains on the wall and floor near the window. This suggested that someone had stood there, observing the cafe staff, including Lisa. The collected semen samples were promptly sent to the laboratory, where experts extracted DNA profiles from these samples. The results of the DNA analysis showed that all 15 semen traces matched the DNA of Narigis. Additionally, fecal samples found in the barn also matched his DNA. In the adjacent room, which had previously been used to store cow's milk, forensic experts found a pipe about 2 feet above the floor, covered in a thick layer of dust except for a small strip. The size of the strip matched the rope used to strangle Lisa. Blood was found on the pipe, and DNA analysis confirmed that the blood belonged to Narigis. On the floor near the pipe, they also found a piece of rope that matched the one on the pipe. Experts conducted tests and identified 2 DNA samples, Lisa's and Narigis's. This was an important step in the police investigation. They had connected the suspect to the rope used to kill the victim. Additionally, a strand of Lisa's hair was found in the room. Another crucial piece of evidence was Narigis's DNA found on her jacket. Based on this evidence, the police believed that Lisa had been murdered there. Police pieced together a similar sequence of events. Narigis had been observing the cafe for some time, and when Lisa was alone in the parking lot, he approached her. Based on the jogger's account, he may have pretended to ask Lisa for directions to a certain city or used some other tactic to trick her. Narigis may have then lured Lisa into his car to enter a route into the GPS system. Since Lisa was a kind person who always tried to help others, she may have agreed. Once she was in the car, the perpetrator covered her mouth and drove to a secluded place. At the scene, the perpetrator tied a rope around the victim's neck and hung her from a pipe. According to doctors, this action may have excited the perpetrator so much that he experienced an adrenaline rush, causing him to defecate on the spot. After the victim died, he placed Lisa's body in his car and drove to the farm, throwing her belongings out the window on the way. He hid the victim's body in the trailer's storage locker and covered it with old clothes. The entire process took less than an hour. Despite the overwhelming evidence, he maintained his innocence. His wife and brother were not involved and were released. They quickly left Sweden and returned to Lithuania. Preparations for the trial were intense. Nerigis claimed that he had worked in that warehouse for a long time, so his DNA could have been present due to his work. Additionally, he had alibis from his wife and brother, although there were doubts about the reliability of both sources in court. This could work in his favor, although many uncertainties remained. However, the presence of Nerigis's DNA on the victim's clothes could only be explained by his direct contact with her on the day of the murder. Furthermore, the police also found a witness who saw Nerigis's car near the cafe just before and after Lisa's abduction. According to the witness, the car had traveled several times on the road between the cafe and the farm at a time when Nerigis was believed to be asleep at home, according to his brother and his wife. After months of investigation, experts used the most advanced equipment to examine all the collected evidence. They found traces of Nerigis's DNA on most of Lisa's clothing, including inside her underwear. With public interest piqued, the investigators continued to search for more clues that could influence the proceedings and strengthen Nerigis's connection to the case. They traveled to Lithuania to speak with his wife and his brother again. The woman maintained that he had not left the house between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m., but when his brother was questioned, the detectives quickly obtained the information they wanted. After presenting the man with all the evidence against his brother and the details of what he had done to the 17-year-old girl, the man decided to cooperate with the police. He claimed that Nerigis was not home that night, returning only around 7:30 p.m. He looked dirty and immediately washed all his clothes. As the police began questioning all the residents and visiting their homes, Nerigis whispered to his brother to tell the police that he had been home during that time. Nerigis later explained that he was afraid of being charged with a crime he did not commit, as he was an immigrant and had no alibi at the time of the abduction. The brother truly believed his cousin was innocent, but after hearing all the evidence, he realized that his initial thoughts might have been incorrect. Lisa's funeral took place just a month after her murder. The church where the funeral was held could only accommodate 130 people, but many more came to say goodbye to her. The organizers decided to set up extra chairs and screens outside so that everyone could watch the ceremony. The trial began 4 months after the murder and once again attracted national attention, placing everyone involved under a great deal of pressure. Nerigis's lawyer claimed that his client's DNA could have been found on the victim's clothes because he had worked in the barn. However, the prosecutor argued that this explanation did not make sense, especially concerning Lisa's underwear. The only way the suspect's DNA could have ended up there would be if he had touched the victim's underwear. The lawyer was unable to produce any concrete evidence to prove his client's innocence. Instead, he theorized that the real killer was Nerigis's brother. According to this theory, the brother took multiple samples of Nerigis's DNA and deliberately left them on the victim's body and at the crime scene to confuse the case. But this defense was quickly dismissed. The trial lasted a month, and Nerigis was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in a high-security prison. Although in Sweden, this prison offers the same amenities as a 3-star hotel. The lawyer appealed but was rejected. In early 2017, Nerigis himself applied to be transferred to a prison in his home country of Lithuania for reasons that remain unclear. Lithuanian prisons are significantly worse than those in Sweden. Yet the court still accepted the defendant's request. After all, providing comfortable conditions of detention cost Swedish taxpayers hundreds of dollars per day per prisoner. That same year, Nerigis appealed to the Lithuanian court, and his sentence was reduced from life to 15 years. However, his joy was short-lived. A few weeks later, the court overturned the decision, and Nerigis was once again sentenced to life in prison, with no chance of returning to a comfortable cell in Sweden. 5 years later, in August 2022, Nerigis was transferred to a prison in Lithuania. While other prisoners were being moved to another ward, one of them attacked and seriously injured Nargis, leading to his death on the way to the hospital. As for the suspect's wife, her involvement in the case has not been completely ruled out. The police stressed that it was almost impossible for her to be directly involved in the kidnapping or murder. If that were the case, experts would have found her DNA on the victim's clothes or belongings. However, it cannot be ruled out that she knew about Nargis's crime and tried to help him escape punishment by providing a false alibi. Nargis's brother also raised questions. Cafe employees reported seeing two men standing near the barn and watching them. Assuming that one of them was Nargis himself, the other man could have been his brother. However, the man's DNA was not found in the barn or on Lisa's clothes, making it unlikely that he was involved in the murder. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Barbara Maybe Abel. There are books and films that help teach ways to confront criminals and appropriate behavior during kidnappings or critical situations. However, reading about these scenarios and actually experiencing them are two different things. Barbara Abel fully realized this when one of the most dangerous criminals in the U.S. showed up at her doorstep. On November 14, 1974, a scared Dale ran to his neighbor's house and began knocking frantically on the door. When the neighbor opened it, he found the boy covered in blood with strange marks on his ankles. Dale explained that the marks were from ropes used by an unknown man who had tied him and his Aunt Beverly while his mother, Barbara, was kidnapped. The neighbor quickly called 911. When the police arrived at the Abel family's home, it looked like a crime scene. There was blood everywhere, and the neighbor noted that Barbara's car was missing, along with her. Dale assisted the detectives by providing details about his mother, 31-year-old Barbara Maybe Abel, who had a twin sister named Beverly, who had been diagnosed with cerebral palsy. The twin sisters shared a deep bond from childhood. Barbara consistently supported and cared for Beverly. As they grew older, their relationship became stronger, with Barbara always striving to improve Beverly's quality of life and help her manage daily challenges. Barbara was smart, cheerful, and serious when necessary. After their father passed away, young Barbara took on many household responsibilities to help her mother. Throughout her life, she maintained a positive outlook and supported her loved ones during tough times. In April 1968, she gave birth to her son, Dale, and felt immense joy as a new mother. However, she soon faced challenges, primarily due to her breakup with the baby's father. Their disagreements had begun about a year before Dale was born. Although they hoped Dale would help resolve their issues, things only got worse. Ultimately, Barbara chose to raise her son as a single mother, later reflecting that this was the right decision for both of them, as it allowed her to create a stable environment for herself and her child. Unfortunately, the family faced a series of challenges. In May 1974, their mother passed away from an illness, leaving them in shock. It felt as if their world had collapsed. Their family had always been very close, so their mother's death deeply affected both Barbara and Beverly. Despite their grief, they tried to maintain a normal environment for the younger generation. Barbara worked diligently, writing, and taking a job at a radio station, while Beverly managed household chores. They lived in a modest home in Palm Beach, Florida, and surrounded 6-year-old Dale with love and care, gradually recovering from this tragedy. On November 14, 1974, it seemed like an ordinary day for the Abel family. Beverly assisted Barbara in getting ready for work, and Dale was preparing for school. After dropping Dale off, Barbara went to the radio station where she worked as a news editor. Around noon, she tried to call Beverly, who was at home, but there was no answer. This was strange because Beverly never missed calls. She was always eager to talk, but this time she didn't even call back. Initially, Barbara thought her sister might have fallen asleep and didn't think much of it, so she continued with her work. After leaving the radio station around 5 p.m., she picked up Dale and headed home. expecting to see her sister there. As soon as they entered, she called Beverly, but there was no answer. Barbara asked her son to find his aunt, thinking she might have been listening to music and hadn't heard them come home. While Barbara went to the kitchen, she felt a sudden and intense fear that sent a chill down her spine. It was a deep, instinctual dread, and in that moment, she heard a voice say, "Don't turn around or I'll attack." Just then, her son Dale rushed into the kitchen and said that his aunt was in the bedroom and bleeding. When Barbara turned around, she saw a man pointing a weapon at her and Dale. Staying calm, she told the intruder that she needed to see her twin sister because she was worried about her. This was a risky move, but it seemed to impress the man, who agreed to let her see her sister. With the weapon still aimed at them, Barbara and Dale cautiously walked toward the bedroom, trying to keep Dale away from the armed man. Beverly was in the bedroom, lying on the bed with a gag in her mouth, crying. Barbara kissed her sister and whispered that everything would be all right. Barbara noticed that Beverly was undressed under the blanket. Unable to hold back her feelings, she confronted the attacker, questioning whether he had abused Beverly. He responded with laughter, claiming he had attempted to assault Beverly but had failed. His cruel smile and taunting words sent another chill down Barbara's spine. Following this, she tried to bribe the assailant. She revealed that she had a significant amount of money at home and was willing to give him her car keys. In return, she pleaded with him to leave them alone and not to harm them. The stranger, however, expressed his desire to take her child and reach for the boy. Barbara firmly declared that she would never give up her son and instead offered to take Dale's place. The man agreed. The assailant identified himself as Paul John Knowles and claimed he had just escaped from prison, stating he had no plans to return. He warned Barbara that he wouldn't harm her as long as she followed his orders exactly. Although Barbara knew he was lying and likely wouldn't let her go easily, she felt she had no good options left. Her primary concern was the safety of her son and her injured sister, who needed help. However, Paul was determined to keep them as hostages to buy time for his escape. He tightly bound Dale's and Beverly's hands and feet on the bed. Barbara was horrified at the thought of leaving her loved ones in such a vulnerable state, but she realized that any resistance could endanger their lives. Throughout this terrifying situation, she remained calm, speaking to her family as if everything was normal, reassuring them that it would all be over soon and that they would be all right. This approach worked. She managed to soothe her child and keep the kidnapper from becoming agitated. Barbara emphasized that they should not provoke Paul, as she had no way of knowing his true intentions. Her goal was to lead the attacker far away from her home and loved ones, then find a way to escape and alert the authorities. Paul accepted the offered money and car keys. He pointed the weapon at Barbara, then got into the car and drove away. Throughout this time, Barbara was primarily concerned about her family. More than 30 minutes later, Dale escaped and sought help. The police responded to the call. They found an abandoned car near the house, which was the vehicle used by the kidnapper. The car was registered in one state, but its license plate had been stolen from another location. Investigations revealed that the car had been stolen from a man named William Bates a couple of months earlier. Eventually, William's body was discovered, strangled, in Ohio. Inside the car's glove compartment, detectives discovered numerous credit cards and insurance policies, the majority of which belonged to Carswell Carr. The man had become a victim of a double homicide along with his 15-year-old daughter, Amanda, just days before Barbara's kidnapping. The tragedy at the Carr home in Milledgeville, Georgia, was one of the most horrifying scenes the investigators had ever witnessed. A 15-year-old girl had been brutally strangled, and her father had suffered around 30 stab wounds. It was evident that the perpetrator was a dangerous individual, prepared to kill anyone who interfered. On November 6, 1974, the Carr home, located almost 7 kilometers from where Barbara lived, was found ransacked. Inside the car, discovered near the home of Barbara, a will belonging to a man named Paul John Knowles was also found. Once law enforcement checked their database, they identified Paul as an escaped serial killer. Authorities linked him to at least 35 murders across the United States. He traveled aimlessly, leaving behind trails of blood and bodies, completely indifferent to the consequences of his actions. He selected his victims randomly, unlike most psychopaths, who usually target a specific type. He took lives with the same pleasure, whether the victim was a child or an adult. He left behind a lot of evidence, but there were no hints about his next actions. Meanwhile, Barbara and Paul were driving a Barbara's car when he discovered he was wanted by the police. He forced Barbara to change the radio station. She complied and noticed that he seemed to expect the news to be on all channels, while others remained quiet, which frustrated him. At that moment, she was still unaware of his true nature. Suddenly, he confessed to having killed several people. This made Barbara uncomfortable, so she tried to change the topic to distract him from his violent past by discussing the weather, movies, or anything unrelated. Despite her attempts, he continued to casually mention his killings. Barbara began to act flirtatiously, realizing that her femininity might be her only chance for escape. Barbara decided to try to win him over. She called him sweet and offered him a cigarette. When Paul asked why she was being so nice, Barbara replied that she didn't believe he was a bad person, and even said he reminded her of the famous actor Robert Redford. This seemed to work. After the comparison, Paul became much more responsive, calm, and easier to talk to. They continued their conversation as if nothing bad had happened, as if they were simply on a date. Paul asked Barbara what she did for a living. She replied that she was a news editor on the radio and dreamed of writing a book. This excited Paul, who seemed genuinely interested in her ambitions, especially the idea that she could write a book about him. He expressed a desire to become famous, mentioning that he wanted the book's proceeds to go to his mother, but he didn't specify how he planned to achieve that fame. He repeatedly claimed to have killed many times. Although she was terrified, Barbara tried to hide her fear and remain calm. At one point, she realized that her only chance to escape was to push Paul out of the moving car, but she couldn't summon the strength or courage to do it. Barbara understood that if the investigators discovered who she was with, they would likely conclude that she was already dead. Paul was a ruthless predator with an insatiable thirst for killing. He was unpredictable and armed, which made him extremely dangerous. The most frightening aspect was that they were in an unknown location, and she had no idea where Paul was taking her. The detectives discovered that he was traveling between different states, often switching cars, and that his attacks consistently resulted in death. Occasionally, he took hostages, all of whom ended up dead. The chances of Barbara surviving her abduction were deemed very slim, but her family and friends refused to give up hope. They believed she could still be found alive. Law enforcement officials realized they had to act quickly because with every minute that passed, the likelihood of rescuing Barbara decreased. A search perimeter was set up on the roads in West Palm Beach, along with checkpoints. Authorities announced plans to intercept the suspect, Paul, focusing on Barbara's distinctive golden vehicle. However, detectives were unaware that they were too late. Paul had already taken Barbara beyond the checkpoints. Paul arrived with Barbara at a motel in Fort Pierce, about 100 kilometers from the scene of the abduction. He intended to rest there for the night and had no plans to release Barbara. To avoid suspicion, they registered as Mr. and Mrs. Smith, pretending to be on their honeymoon. Barbara felt that the hotel receptionist was suspicious of them based on her gaze. Meanwhile, she knew that Paul was carrying a weapon at his waist. To allay the receptionist's suspicions, Barbara embraced Paul and acted like a loving wife. This successfully convinced the administrator, who then handed them the key to the room. As soon as they entered the room, Paul ordered Barbara to take off her clothes. Barbara felt scared and protested, saying she was too tired, but Paul ignored her and insisted she comply. While the criminal was trying to do his dirty deed, she thought of everything that came to mind about her son and sister in order to detach herself from what was happening, but at first, she couldn't manage it. Paul grew frustrated and angry. becoming aggressive toward her. Sensing his loss of control, Barbara calmly asked him what he was trying to accomplish, which helped ease his anger momentarily. However, he later abused her. At one point, he shared with her that he had two personalities, referring to them as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, explaining his frequent mood changes. Barbara found it hard to predict his rapid shifts in temperament. After a brief period of calm, Paul suddenly ripped the bed sheets, tied Barbara up with them, and threw her onto the bed before turning on the television. Exhausted both mentally and physically, she eventually fell asleep. In her dreams, Barbara saw her deceased mother, who reassured her that everything would be fine. At that moment, Barbara understood it was a sign and resolved to do whatever it took to save herself. While she slept, she heard news reports and saw Paul intently watching a broadcast that displayed her photographs alongside those of Paul. His identity had already been established. They also reported on other crimes committed by Paul that were known at that time. Barbara was horrified. She understood that her chances of rescue were extremely low. Meanwhile, Paul reveled in the attention he was receiving from the media. Barbara recognized that he desperately wanted to become famous. Later, Paul went to sleep, tying his leg to Barbara's to prevent her from escaping. By November 15, the police still had no leads on her whereabouts. The search for Paul had escalated to a national scale. Headlines in all newspapers and on television shouted that the most dangerous criminal in the country was killing again. Barbara woke up in the morning next to Paul. She had barely slept the entire night, terrified to be tied to one of America's most wanted criminals. Paul took her to the nearest diner for breakfast. While he eagerly devoured scrambled eggs, toast, pancakes, and orange juice, Barbara couldn't eat anything. She glanced around nervously, hoping someone would recognize her, while also looking for ways to escape. However, she quickly noticed that Paul's weapon was aimed at her. He warned her not to make any sudden movements. To her dismay, she realized that no one seemed to recognize them, despite the extensive news coverage and radio alerts. Barbara understood that she couldn't rely on anyone for help. She was too scared to scream or ask for assistance, fearing it would only worsen her situation. She decided to keep playing her role, believing it would save her life. She buried her face in the plate and had a small breakfast. Afterward, Paul and Barbara returned to the motel, where he abused her again. Initially, she fought back, which only fueled his anger. At one point, Barbara feared for her life, believing he might not stop in his rage. However, she managed to save herself once more by employing her understanding and psychological tactics. She stayed calm, engaged him in conversation, and successfully avoided a violent outcome for the second time. During their dialogue, Paul mentioned that he wanted to get to know Barbara before everything changed, clearly referring to his criminal actions. Thus, she realized that she had found a way to connect with him, and her chances of a positive outcome immediately increased. Later, Paul tied her to the bed again and stepped out to make a phone call. Barbara struggled to free herself, but was unsuccessful. Then she noticed a key on the nightstand. It appeared that Paul had hastily closed the door and locked it. Oddly, it seemed as if he had done this intentionally, perhaps to protect her from himself. A few minutes later, he began banging on the door from the outside. Barbara waited in silence, her heart racing. Through the door, he told her that he knew she couldn't speak because of the gag in her mouth. He urged her not to tell the police that Paul had hurt her, claiming he never meant to harm her and was sorry for what had happened. His final words were, "I love you, and I'm leaving." After that, the sounds outside faded away. He had truly left. At first, Barbara was too scared to move. She didn't scream or call for help, fearing he was still outside, waiting for a reason to hurt her. She wondered if he had said those things to test her, as if she needed to prove something. However, she also realized that if she waited too long, he might change his mind, and she would miss her chance to escape. Finally, Barbara managed to free herself using the sharp edge of a piece of glass from the nightstand. She quickly called the front desk, telling them that a serial killer had kidnapped her, then hung up. The administrator alerted the police, and requested assistance. A few minutes later, police officers opened the door. After her release, Barbara immediately called Beverly to hear the voices of both her sister and her son. They were overjoyed that she had managed to escape. However, despite the happy reunion, Barbara was still troubled by the fact that Paul was still at large and could return to harm her. Her nightmare could not truly end as long as he remained free. Fortunately, she did not suffer serious physical injuries during her kidnapping, but the psychological effects left her deeply affected. Barbara experienced post-traumatic stress disorder for a long time. She credited her faith in God for helping her family heal and chose to forgive Paul in order to find peace moving forward. By November 17, law enforcement had learned that a patrol officer, Charles Campbell, was missing and suspected he might have been abducted by Paul. The officer had attempted to stop a vehicle and approached the driver's window, but he was too late and saw a weapon aimed at Charles. Paul kidnapped Charles and took the patrol car, leaving behind Barbara's car. Shortly after, the police vehicle was found abandoned on the roadside while Paul was trying to stop another driver, James Mayer. Now, Paul had two hostages, whom he later transferred to another vehicle after killing the driver. About 100 kilometers into Georgia, a gas station employee noticed a man in uniform acting strangely in the back seat of one of the vehicles that had pulled in. He promptly alerted emergency services. After the vehicle left, the employee reported his observations, which helped law enforcement identify the car and its location. They initiated a chase and managed to intercept the vehicle. However, Paul refused to stop, even with flat tires. Driving on flat tires didn't last long. He lost control and crashed into a barrier. Paul abandoned the vehicle and fled into the woods. The police chased him closely, and explosions were heard from the forest. Despite this, Paul managed to escape again. The following day, a hunter saw Paul in the woods. He noticed that Paul was injured and reported the sighting to the authorities. Eventually, Paul was captured and refused to reveal the location of Charles and James, the driver of a stolen car. On December 18, about a month after their abduction, they were found tied to a tree in Georgia, both dead from wounds inflicted by a weapon. News of Paul, the most dangerous serial killer, spread on television, bringing relief to Barbara and her family. She had spent over a day in captivity and fully realized the threat the detectives were facing. Barbara remembered that he had escaped from prison before and feared it could happen again, leaving her and her family feeling unsafe for a while. They moved in with relatives, but this offered little comfort to Barbara. Barbara understood that she could only find peace if Paul could never harm anyone again. During this time, she faced significant psychological struggles. On the way to prison, Paul had a devious plan in mind. He was placed in the sheriff's car, and they drove to the location. The driver and accompanying officer were unaware that Paul had a paperclip with him. During the drive, Paul waited for a moment when the officers were distracted and managed to pick the lock on his handcuffs. A struggle broke out, and he seized the officer's weapon. Fortunately, the sheriff reacted quickly. He attacked Paul, emptying his entire magazine, realizing that both were in mortal danger and only decisive action could save their lives. Paul had died. This news brought immense relief to Barbara, her family, and many others who had been anxiously following the villain's actions across the country. Finally, he could no longer pose a threat, allowing everyone to breathe a sigh of relief. After much contemplation, Barbara ultimately decided to stay in her home instead of moving. Although she was going through a difficult time, the house held memories of her mother and the joyful moments of her childhood. Among these memories was her miraculous escape from one of the most dangerous serial killers in the U.S. during the 1970s. As she worked to heal from her trauma, Barbara married Jim Abel. Despite the challenges she faced, including surviving cancer, she raised Dale. Motivated by her experiences and perhaps Paul's quest for notoriety, Barbara wrote a book detailing her abduction from her own perspective. She vividly described the horrors she faced with the killer and focused on the strategies she used to escape the fate that befell many of his victims. Sadly, her sister Beverly, who passed away from cancer in 2019, never had the chance to read Barbara's book, published in 2021, but Beverly was involved in the early stages of its creation and supported her sister throughout the process. As it turned out, besides Barbara, there was another survivor named Sandy Fox, who was also a writer. There is a theory that Paul intentionally left these two women alive so they could write books about him and make him famous. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case, the case of Christopher Wilder. Some criminals leave a lasting mark on the criminal world, not only due to their brutality, but also because of the sophisticated methods they use to cover up their crimes. Today's story is about a series of mysterious murders that once shook America. Where dreams become nightmares, Elizabeth Kenyon, a 23-year-old aspiring model, had big dreams. She competed as a finalist in a beauty pageant in Florida, unfortunately. Her beautiful journey was tragically cut short on March 5, 1984. Elizabeth disappeared without a trace, worried. Her parents immediately contacted the Miami police to report her missing. However, as is often the case, the authorities downplayed their concerns. Claiming there was no need to worry yet, they suggested Elizabeth might be out celebrating her pageant success with friends or a boyfriend. The police advised the family to wait 24 hours before filing an official missing persons report. But her parents knew this wasn't like Elizabeth. She wasn't the type to party and always made sure to inform others of her plans. A day passed, but the police still made no move to solve her disappearance. Her mother, however, had a strong feeling that something terrible had happened to her daughter. Ultimately, her parents decided to hire a private investigator, together with Elizabeth's parents. The detective visited the apartment Elizabeth had been renting, hoping to uncover any clues. After searching the apartment, they found two notable items: an address book and a photo album. The album contained several pictures of Elizabeth's friends, while a small note inside detailed her schedule for the day she went missing. The note mentioned a planned meeting with a photographer at a specific address. When the investigator followed up on the lead, the building concierge confirmed seeing Elizabeth on the day she disappeared. She had been accompanied by a man. The detective soon discovered that the man she was scheduled to meet was Christopher Wilder. A 38-year-old who had been in a relationship with Elizabeth, Christopher had even proposed to her. But Elizabeth had declined, citing concerns about their age difference, on March 11, just 6 days after Elizabeth went missing. The detective contacted Christopher to ask him some questions about her disappearance. Christopher claimed he had no idea where Elizabeth might be. The detective then arranged an in-person meeting with Christopher. During their calm conversation, Christopher showed the detective some of his photography. Nothing incriminating or suspicious surfaced, except for one particular photo of Elizabeth. In the image, she appeared visibly frightened, which the seasoned detective found unusual. Christopher explained that they had only done a short photo session on the day in question, after which Elizabeth supposedly left with an unidentified man. Still, the detective decided to investigate Christopher further. Christopher Wilder was born on March 13, 1945, in Sydney, New South Wales, to an Australian mother, June Wilder, and an American father, Coley Chapman Wilder. Who was a naval officer, Christopher was the oldest of 4 sons. His life was challenging from the start. Christopher was nearly stillborn and is believed to have nearly drowned in a swimming pool at the age of 2. These incidents were only the beginning of his troubled life. On January 4, 1963, when Christopher was 17, he and 2 friends had abused and assaulted a 13-year-old girl at a quarry. while all three denied involvement. Christopher was sentenced to probation. He later claimed that he underwent electroshock therapy as part of a rehabilitation program. Some experts speculated that this treatment could have been a traumatic experience, potentially worsening his mental state and contributing to his later violent behavior, however. No concrete evidence of this therapy has ever been found. It's also possible that Christopher fabricated this story to justify his actions. A journalist even suggested that another claim about nearly drowning in a swimming pool was also false. As Christopher's parents did not confirm it, these accounts may have been Christopher's attempts to gain sympathy. In 1968, Christopher got married, but his wife left him after just 1 week. The incident occurred after Christopher was arrested on suspicion of multiple abuse offenses at Manly Beach, Australia, following their divorce. His ex-wife informed the authorities that she believed Christopher had attempted to seduce her mother and another relative shortly after their marriage. She also discovered photographs of women in lingerie in his work briefcase and car, suggesting an obsessive fixation on women. Additionally, she suspected that he had twice attempted to strangle her during intimate moments, possibly with the intent to kill her in November of the same year. Christopher used the sensitive photos to blackmail a nursing student in Australia into having intimate relations with him, although the woman reported the incident to the police. The case was dropped because she refused to testify later. She revealed that her fear of retaliation from Christopher, whom she already perceived as unstable, had prevented her from coming forward. After emigrating to the United States, Christopher began a new chapter in his life, one that would eventually lead to his dark crimes. A resourceful. He entered the real estate business and achieved notable success, amassing a substantial fortune. With his newfound wealth, he purchased a luxurious waterfront mansion in the prestigious Boynton Beach area, located 25 miles south of Palm Beach. Along with a Porsche 911 and a boat, Christopher also developed a passion for car racing, participating in the Miami Grand Prix and embracing an extravagant lifestyle. During this period, he frequently vacationed in Hawaii and the Bahamas. It was also during this time that he developed a strong interest in photography. He invested in high-end photography equipment to enhance the quality of his work and even converted a room in his mansion into a darkroom to fully immerse himself in the hobby. However, he was driven by other impulses, vastly different from art. Between 1971 and 1975, Christopher repeatedly became the focus of investigations related to abuse offenses. On one occasion, he lured a young woman into his pickup truck under the pretense of photographing her for a modeling agency. Of course, this was a lie, and the girl became a victim of brutal abuse. Despite numerous allegations from his victims, Christopher was never held accountable for his crimes. In 1977, a psychiatrist who evaluated him concluded that he was mentally ill. The psychiatrist considered him dangerous, recommended that he remain under constant medical supervision and participate in a specialized treatment program, according to the expert. Christopher harbored an obsessive desire to dominate women, degrade them to the level of slaves, and inflict pain and injuries. However, the psychiatrist's conclusions did not result in any legal consequences, and Christopher was acquitted by the jury on April 13, 1980. A 17-year-old girl named Carla Hendry from Beverly, Massachusetts, escaped from an attack and provided law enforcement with details about the perpetrator's vehicle. However, no action was taken. In 1982, while visiting his parents in Australia, Christopher was accused of an abuse offense involving two 15-year-old girls from Manly. He had lured them to a remote area and forced them to pose sensitively, thankfully. The girls were not seriously harmed and were able to identify him. Leading to his arrest, Christopher's parents posted bail for him, and he was even permitted to return to Florida while awaiting his legal proceedings, which were scheduled for April 1984 during the investigation of Elizabeth's case. Authorities uncovered a connection to another case, just 7 days before Elizabeth disappeared. A 20-year-old woman named Rosario Teresa Gonzalez went missing during the Miami Grand Prix. Christopher, a racing enthusiast, had attended the event. Rosario, a model working for a marketing company, had been handing out flyers and promotional items at the event. She vanished shortly after the race. It was later revealed that she had agreed to a photography session with Christopher, who had driven off in his Porsche. The circumstances strongly suggested that Christopher was involved in the disappearances of both women. On March 12, 1984, Elizabeth's parents sought help from an FBI special agent specializing in homicide investigations at the Miami office. Frustrated by law enforcement's lack of interest in the case, the family hired a private investigator and reached out to the Miami Herald to raise public awareness about Elizabeth's disappearance, hoping to provoke a response from the suspected abductor. On March 16, 1984, the newspaper published an article claiming significant progress in the investigation. Though it did not mention Christopher by name, the article briefly described the suspect as an Australian, a race car driver, and an amateur photographer. The intention was to prompt a reaction from Christopher. Law enforcement finally began paying closer attention to these cases after the publicity surrounding them. When agents reviewed the evidence, they quickly noticed a suspicious link between the two missing women, Elizabeth and Rosario, and their scheduled photography sessions with a man named Christopher. A background check revealed that Christopher had a long history of legal issues in Australia. At the time, he was on probation for an abuse charge and awaiting a new trial. This discovery gave the FBI grounds to open a full investigation on March 20, around the same time. They received a report from Linda Grover, 19, about an attempted kidnapping. Linda described being attacked by a man who tried to abduct her, seemingly intending to keep her captive or abuse her as a slave. Thankfully, she managed to escape. Her description of the attacker matched Christopher exactly. An FBI agent immediately interviewed Linda. She said, while she was working, a man approached her, complimented her appearance, and offered her a modeling opportunity, claiming to be a fashion photographer. He invited her to his car to view his portfolio. Linda declined and walked away, but the man persisted. He followed her in his car, urging her to go to a park with him for a quick photo session. Promising to pay her $25, Linda refused again and went into the store. When Linda stepped outside, the man approached her again, although he appeared friendly. She sensed a sinister presence about him that made her uncomfortable. She scanned the area for anyone who might help if needed, but the place was deserted. Christopher tried to convince her to join him for a photo shoot, opening his car to show her fashion magazines. This all occurred in broad daylight in a public setting. Suddenly, Christopher struck Linda on the head, knocking her unconscious. When Linda woke up, she was immobilized and lying in the back seat of a car. She began crying, which enraged Christopher. He stopped the car, taped her mouth shut with duct tape, and forced her into the trunk. He then drove to Glen Oaks Motel. Once there, he stuffed her into a sack. Restricting her movement entirely, Christopher glued her eyelids shut with super glue, tied her up, and abused her to hours of torture. Using a stun weapon to shock her whenever she resisted, His cruelty convinced Linda that she wouldn't survive. However, at one point, when Christopher became distracted, Linda managed to free herself and hide in the bathroom. She banged on the walls and screamed for help as loudly as she could. The noise scared Christopher, and he fled later. When an FBI agent showed Linda photographs of Christopher, she trembled and confidently identified him as her abductor. Linda eventually became a key witness in the case. However, the investigation progressed very slowly. Within a week, Linda had to leave the state out of fear for her safety. She was placed under FBI protection and relocated to a secret location. Law enforcement soon realized they were dealing with a violent and dangerous individual linked to multiple crimes. It took her more than 30 years to recover from the trauma she suffered. During that time, Linda earned a doctoral degree and frequently spoke to the media, sharing the story of her miraculous escape at the time of her abduction. Linda didn't fully comprehend how fortunate she was to survive, despite her fear. She was determined to ensure the criminal was imprisoned for a long time. Meanwhile, authorities needed more evidence to charge Christopher with the abductions of Rosario and Elizabeth. Police secured a search warrant for Christopher's home and arrived with FBI agents. They broke down the door and found the house empty. Christopher had fled days earlier. A massive manhunt was launched to locate him. Investigators thoroughly searched the house, but Christopher had meticulously cleaned it, leaving behind no fingerprints or evidence. Interviews with neighbors revealed that Christopher had disappeared immediately after the Glen Oaks motel incident, likely realizing the police were closing in and would soon come for him. On March 23rd, in Canaveral Groves, the body of 21-year-old Teresa Ann Ferguson was found. She had last been seen at a shopping mall with a man resembling Christopher. Investigators discovered that Teresa had been beaten with a blunt object and then strangled to death. The method of the attack matched Christopher's profile, raising the victim count to 4. FBI agents concluded they were dealing with a serial killer and feared he could strike again at any moment. Immediate action was critical that same day. Alarming news arrived the day before the raid on Christopher's home. He had been seen at a local bank withdrawing a large amount of cash. This was a serious setback because it meant he now had the resources to travel across the country, pay in cash, and avoid detection with a 24-hour head start. He could already be anywhere before. On March 21, Christopher was seen in Texas, specifically in the parking lot of Lamar University in Beaumont. Witnesses reported that he was speaking with a young woman named Terry Diane Walden, a nursing student who was married and had 2 children. Christopher tried to lure her with an offer for a photo shoot, a tactic he often used. But Terry politely declined. Thankfully, he did not forcefully abduct her at that moment, sparing her life for the time being. However, this safety was short-lived. Later, at a supermarket, Christopher, essentially waiting for Terry, approached her again. He repeated his photo shoot offer. This time, in a more menacing tone, Terry refused once more. But Christopher was determined. He followed her through the store and into the parking lot, where he struck her on the head and abducted her. The FBI issued statements as they pursued this dangerous criminal, but he always seemed to stay about 2 days ahead of them. According to agents from the Miami office, a press release was issued describing Christopher's car, which he had used to kidnap Terry. Unfortunately, the car was a common model, and without a license plate number, the information was not very helpful. Terry's profile was distributed across the country, but the slower communication technology of the time delayed the spread of alerts. The FBI had no choice but to follow the grim trail of bodies Christopher left behind. On March 25th, at Penn Square Shopping Mall in Oklahoma City, He abducted 21-year-old Suzanne Wendy Logan. He then drove her to a motel in Newton, Kansas, the next morning. After breakfast, he took her to Milford Reservoir, where he stabbed her to death and left her body there. 2 days later, a fisherman discovered her body. The investigation revealed she had been tortured, abused, and murdered in a particularly horrific manner on March 28th. The FBI received a promising lead on Christopher when they discovered he had rented a hotel room in Colorado using a stolen credit card. This allowed authorities to track his movements. However, officers only learned about this payment the day after the room was booked. Acting quickly, all available police officers, along with FBI agents, rushed to the motel to apprehend Christopher, but he was already gone, although their efforts narrowed the gap in their pursuit to about 1 day. It provided little reassurance, as Christopher's direction of travel remained unknown. Christopher's next sighting occurred at a shopping mall in Grand Junction, Colorado, where he was seen talking to an 18-year-old woman named Cheryl Lynn Bonaventura. Witnesses later observed the two together at a diner, where they mentioned plans to travel to Las Vegas around March 31st. Christopher attacked Cheryl near the Kanab River in Utah. Her body was discovered on May 3rd. This incident led law enforcement to identify malls as his preferred locations for targeting victims. Christopher portrayed himself as a polished and credible individual, dressing in elegant suits and grooming his mustache and beard meticulously. He carried business cards, wore a large diamond ring on the pinky of his left hand, a gold Rolex watch, and a Pentax camera slung over his shoulder. Creating the image of a successful and respectable man, he used his charm and the pretense of being a professional photographer, searching for aspiring models to lure his victims, while also disarming the suspicions of security personnel and mall staff. Despite law enforcement distributing his photos and descriptions to shopping malls and supermarkets nationwide, Christopher continued moving across the country in search of new victims. On April 1st, Christopher Wilder's next victim was Michelle Lynn Korfman, a 17-year-old girl abducted at Meadows Shopping Mall in Las Vegas. Christopher had attended a photography event at the mall, where he approached Michelle and offered her an opportunity to become his first professional model. When the FBI learned about the incident and began investigating the mall, they collected photographs from event attendees, some of which showed Michelle with Christopher. Several images captured him selecting her as his target and following her. Michelle's body was discovered on May 11th, according to forensic analysis results. Her abductor had restrained and tortured her over an extended period. He sealed her mouth and eyes with superglue, abused her, and inflicted deep cuts while she was still alive. The wounds, approximately 3 centimeters deep, were not fatal, but caused her immense pain. The hunt continued. On April 4, 16-year-old Tina Marie Rizzico from California became Christopher's next victim. She had gone to a shopping mall in search of a summer job, hoping to save enough money to buy a new car to replace the old one her father had given her. At the mall, Christopher approached her, complimented her appearance, and offered her $100 in cash for a photo shoot, hoping to earn some extra money. Tina agreed. They went to a nearby park, where she willingly posed, expecting to receive her payment. However, Christopher suddenly pulled out a weapon and forced her into his car. She had no choice but to comply. Christopher drove Tina to a motel in San Diego, where she was subjected to hours of brutal torture. He cut her with a knife, electrocuted her, beat her, and alternated these horrific acts with abuse assault. When Tina disappeared, the FBI issued a special bulletin and held a press conference. By this time, Christopher Wilder had become the most wanted fugitive In the United States, Tina was his seventh known victim. With at least 6 others already confirmed, Christopher's name and crimes were being discussed on television, in newspapers, and on the radio. The FBI hoped this extensive media coverage would lead to his capture. In the spring of 1984, the FBI launched one of the largest manhunts in U.S. history. Despite their efforts, Tina remained missing. Authorities hoped she might still be alive, but in reality, she was enduring unimaginable suffering. On the 6th day of captivity, Christopher told Tina he would set her free if she helped him lure in his next victim. Desperate to survive, Tina agreed. Christopher had already chosen his next target, Dawnette Sue Wilt, a young woman who worked part-time handing out flyers in supermarkets. He forced Tina to pretend she was looking for work in order to convince Dawnette to get into his car. The plan worked, and several witnesses reported seeing an unknown man leaving an Indiana shopping center with 2 women. The man's description matched Christopher, whose face was now widely recognized across the country, despite promising Tina her freedom. Christopher refused to release her and forced her to watch as his victims endured horrifying torture. On April 12, 1984, Christopher, along with his hostages, saw a news report in which Tina's mother pleaded for her daughter's life. This triggered a panic attack in Christopher, something that had been happening more frequently. In a frantic state, he left the motel with his captives. Later, in a forest, Christopher attempted to kill Dawnette. After enduring days of torture, Dawnette was so desperate that she begged him to kill her. Christopher stabbed her twice with a knife due to severe blood loss and the sedatives he had been administering. Dawnette lost consciousness, believing she was dead. Christopher abandoned her. Amazingly, Dawnette survived the nightmare. She regained consciousness, tried to make her way to the nearest road, where a driver found her and helped her. Christopher returned to the spot where he had left Dawnette to confirm her death. But when he discovered she was no longer there, he panicked. Based on Dawnette's testimony, FBI agents determined that the suspect was heading toward the Canadian border. Investigators discovered he was driving a car stolen from Terry. The vehicle was soon found abandoned. Christopher managed to escape once again. He was next spotted at a shopping center in Victor, New York, where he targeted a 30-year-old woman named Beth Elaine Dodge to steal her Pontiac Firebird, again with Tina's assistance. Christopher took Beth to the woods and killed her. He did not abuse or torture Beth. He only wanted her car. After this cold-blooded murder, Christopher unexpectedly released Tina, even giving her money so she could return home. Tina became a crucial witness, providing detailed accounts of the horrors she endured during her captivity. FBI agents learned that Christopher had friends in Canada whom he had visited periodically before his crime spree. Law enforcement was convinced he was heading to them with his newly stolen car. Christopher had gained a significant lead over the agents. Authorities believed he was already en route to the border. In response, all available police forces were mobilized, and law enforcement agencies were alerted to the threat posed by Christopher. On April 13, Christopher stopped at a service station in Colebrook, New Hampshire, near the Canadian border. 2 state police officers at the scene recognized him as a dangerous criminal from distributed bulletins. As the officers carefully observed him, Christopher noticed their presence. He ran to his car and armed himself with a weapon. One of the officers attempted to tackle him from behind, leading to a struggle in which his weapon discharged twice. The first bullet hit Christopher, penetrating his back, while the second caused a fatal chest injury. The officer accidentally attacked himself, despite suffering serious injuries. The officer survived, underwent a long recovery, and later returned to duty as a celebrated hero who had stopped a killer capable of taking more lives. During a search of Christopher's car, police discovered a copy of the book The Collector by John Fowles. The novel tells the story of a man who kidnaps and imprisons a woman in a basement. Eventually leading to her death, authorities believe Christopher was inspired by this book and saw it as a model for his crimes. The serial killer was later cremated in Florida, leaving behind an estate valued at over $7 million that same year. The court ordered taxes to be deducted from the estate. With the remaining funds distributed among the families of his victims, several previous cases allegedly involving Christopher Wilder are also mentioned. On May 29, 1982, near a property owned by Christopher, a bag containing the skeletal remains of 17-year-old Tina Marie Beebe was discovered. Tina's sister revealed that before her disappearance, Tina had planned to attend a photo shoot after being invited by a photographer. Similarly, 20-year-old aspiring model Sherry Lynn Ball disappeared on June 27, 1983, in Boca Raton, Florida. After leaving for a photo shoot, her badly decomposed body was discovered 3 months later by a hunter in Shelby, New York. 18-year-old Tammy Lynn Leppert, an aspiring model, vanished in Florida following a heated argument with a man resembling Christopher Wilder, Tammy's mother, who had been actively supporting her modeling career, claimed that Christopher and Tammy had met during a film casting session. During this meeting, Christopher reportedly asked to photograph Tammy, but she refused. 15-year-old Colleen Emily Osborne went missing after leaving her home in Daytona Beach, Florida, on March 15, 1984. That day, she missed her school bus, skipped classes to go to the beach, and never returned home. On April 6, 1984, her partially buried body was found near a lake in Orange County, Florida. Investigators later uncovered that Christopher Wilder had stayed at a nearby motel on the same day as her disappearance. One of Colleen's classmates reported seeing a man resembling Christopher at their school. Scouting for models, the man had offered $100 to a girl willing to pose for him. But Colleen declined. Christopher Wilder is remembered as one of the most notorious serial killers in the United States. Infamously known by the nicknames the Beauty Queen Killer and the Snapshot Killer, the bodies of Rosario and Elizabeth were never recovered. It has been confirmed that he kidnapped 12 women and murdered 9 of them. Authorities also suspect his involvement in several other similar crimes in the United States and Australia during that period. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore, the case of Richard McCroskey. In September 2009, 4 people were attacked in their home. The bodies were there for days before the police arrived. The victims were Emma Niederbrock, 16, her friend Melanie Wells, 18, and Emma's parents, Mark Niederbrock, 50, and Deborah Kelly, 53. In today's video, we explore the complex chain of events that led to the deaths of these 4 individuals. Mark's family lived in Farmville, Virginia. He graduated from State College and worked as a graphic designer. Mark found his faith and chose to become a pastor, serving at the Hicksburg Church and earning respect in the community. His wife, Deborah, earned her doctorate and became an associate professor of sociology and criminology at Longwood University in Farmville on October 15, 1992. Mark and Deborah welcomed their daughter, Emma Niederbrock, although she was initially a well-adjusted child. She eventually faced common emotional challenges during adolescence, when Emma was around 15. Her parents decided to homeschool her, which led to intense feelings of isolation and frustration. This struggle pushed her into a long-lasting rebellious phase in early 2009, when her parents divorced. Emma's life became even more chaotic. Although they maintained a good relationship, the divorce took a toll on her. During this time, she discovered horrorcore music, which resonated with her through its lyrics for many fans. These lyrics expressed repressed anger and frustration, feeling isolated in her small town of Farmville. Emma found solace in online horror forums, where she met Melanie, an older girl from Virginia, who understood her struggles. Both girls had fathers who were Presbyterian ministers and bonded over their shared frustration with living in such a restrictive environment. Emma met a horror artist on the forums named Richard Samuel McCroskey. Born December 26, 1988, he lived with his sister and parents in Castro Valley, California. Those who knew Richard described him as quiet and somewhat submissive. He was bullied at school for his weight and red hair, which made him feel like an outsider. Richard enjoyed this isolation and developed unique interests that set him apart from his peers, notably. He had a strong dislike for music as a child. However, while at the dentist, his father played a CD by Insane Clown Posse, and Richard was instantly drawn to the band. He then borrowed his father's CD to make a copy, which sparked his passion for music. Richard became interested in horror music around the time he was struggling in school. He faced bullying and had trouble fitting into the traditional education system, which caused him to drop out of 2 high schools. It is important to note that Richard was very intelligent. He had a talent for graphic design and even dreamed of starting his own company. However, his passion for horror music eventually took a different direction. Soon after, Richard bought a cheap microphone and began recording his own music under the name Seco Sam. His lyrics described violent fantasies and the desire to harm others. He uploaded some of his songs to his MySpace page and became heavily involved in the horror music community. Other horror music artists accepted him, and despite the dark nature of his work, he still showed real talent in songwriting. After starting his YouTube channel in 2006, Richard uploaded a variety of content, including concert recordings and disturbing videos. In 2008, when he was 19, he began a relationship with 15-year-old Emma. They quickly bonded and began talking on the phone every day. Richard believed that Emma loved him and genuinely wanted to be with him. Despite the distance between them, they exchanged videos to learn more about each other. While his relationship with Emma blossomed, Richard faced some serious problems at home. His father kicked his mother out of the house in April 2009, which may have strengthened his relationship with Emma, whose parents had also split up just a few months earlier. Emma, Richard, and Melanie made plans to meet in September for a horror music festival called Strictly for the Wicked. Richard began going to Farmville, while Melanie flew in and stayed with Emma and Deborah. Deborah was initially nervous about letting an older guy stay with her daughter. However, seeing Emma happy for the first time since her divorce, she changed her mind. She agreed to let Richard stay, but insisted that she and Mark accompany the trio to the horrorcore music festival. Emma posted on Richard's MySpace, expressing her love for him and her excitement at finally meeting him. Unfortunately, things did not go as Emma had expected. Richard acted immaturely, which disappointed Emma. However, since they had planned to attend the festival, she decided to be polite and go along. It was also a chance to see her favorite horrorcore bands. Even though Richard had disappointed her, she knew that she could still enjoy the festival with Melanie, Richard was probably excited to spend time with Emma, whom he considered his girlfriend, however. Emma had other intentions. Those close to her noted that she never referred to Richard as her boyfriend. They were just getting to know each other. Richard may have misinterpreted their relationship. Witnesses reported that Richard was upset when he saw Emma flirting with other guys. She deliberately avoided him, which may have further upset Richard. Tensions rose when Emma exchanged phone numbers with another guy. Richard then invaded her privacy by checking her messages and discovered that the guy had asked Emma to be his girlfriend. Although Richard was emotionally disturbed, no one around him noticed anything unusual. The group then returned to Farmville at approximately 2:43 a.m. Melanie posted on MySpace about the fun she had at the show, how much she missed her family, and that she would be returning home on the 16th while she was posting. Richard was drinking, using illegal substances, and taking strong painkillers. At approximately 3 a.m. on September 14, Richard took a hammer from Emma's backyard and went upstairs. He entered Melanie's room and struck her on the head. Killing her instantly, he then entered Emma's mother, Deborah's room, and killed her as well. After that, he entered Emma's room. While it is unclear what happened next, it is possible that Richard watched her sleep and imagined the life he thought they could have together. He eventually attacked Emma, delivering fatal blows to her face after the murders. Richard was at a loss for what to do next in his chaotic mental state. He chose to record videos of himself in these recordings. He talked about the terrible acts he had committed, acknowledging that people would despise him for it. But he felt he had no choice because he had lost control in the videos. He expressed remorse for his actions and conveyed love for his family. On a darker note, Richard spent 3 days in the house with the people he had hurt. He did not shower, and it was unclear if he even ate or slept by September 16th. However, he could no longer hide from reality. Melanie's mother had been trying to contact her for days, knowing that Melanie would return on the 16th. She became worried when there was still no news and asked her husband to go to Farmville to check on her. He waited 8 hours outside Deborah's house. He kept knocking and calling, but no one answered. So he went home. The next day, Melanie's mother called Deborah's house phone. Richard answered and informed Melanie's mother that the girls were visiting Emma's father, which prompted her to contact Mark. Mark said that Emma and Melanie were not with him and that he had not heard from them for several days, realizing that something was wrong. Mark went to his ex-wife Deborah's house, where Richard was staying, around 5 p.m. when Mark entered the house. Richard immediately attacked him after killing Mark. Richard dragged his and Melanie's bodies into Emma's room. Melanie's mother became increasingly concerned when Mark stopped answering her phone calls. She called Richard again, and this time he insisted that he did not know where the girls were. He mentioned hearing strange noises coming from the basement. Melanie's mother instructed him to call 911, which he did. When Richard called 911, he stated that he had heard a noise in the basement and was too scared to investigate. He asked the police to come and help him check what the noise in the basement was. He also informed them that the house was not his. He was at his girlfriend's house when the police arrived to assist him. They noticed a foul odor, however. The police did not find any reason to investigate further. They felt satisfied with the explanation Richard provided and left the crime scene. Strangely, the police did not notice the dried blood on Richard. When the police left, he escaped. He found Mark's car keys and drove away. Meanwhile, Melanie's mother repeatedly called the police, urging them to take action regarding her missing daughter. forcing the police to return to the crime scene once more. By this time, Richard was gone. The front door was unlocked, and when the police entered, they smelled a foul odor. They searched the house and discovered 4 bodies, prompting them to launch an investigation into the events that had occurred while trying to get to the airport. Richard, an inexperienced driver, caused a car accident. He was arrested by the police that night, however, because he had not yet been identified as a murder suspect. He was only charged with driving without a license, a misdemeanor. This allowed him to leave as long as he promised to attend court. A tow truck driver came to tow the car and asked Richard if he wanted a ride, which he accepted. Requesting to be dropped off at a nearby gas station during the trip, the tow truck driver noticed a strong, foul odor coming from Richard, describing it as the worst odor he had ever encountered. Upon arriving at the gas station, Richard was captured on surveillance footage, purchasing several items. He then went to the airport to purchase a ticket home. Unfortunately for him, he did not have enough money for his next flight, so he had to wait until the next morning with nowhere else to go. He fell asleep in the waiting area. Eventually, the police identified Richard as a suspect and issued an arrest warrant for him by any means necessary. Airport security captured video footage of him, and a security guard alerted the police to his location. Resulting in Richard's arrest, the police initially tried to link him to 2 other murders in the area and charged him with 6 counts of premeditated murder. 2 of those charges were later dropped. But Richard Samuel McCroskey still faced the death penalty on the remaining 4. He eventually pleaded guilty in hopes of receiving a lighter sentence from the judge and was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Richard is currently incarcerated at Wallens Ridge State Prison in Big Stone Gap, Virginia. There are reports that other inmates dislike Richard and often bully him. Although these claims have not been verified, Melanie's parents may find comfort in knowing that he is no longer capable of harming anyone. Welcome back. Detectives, let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Jennifer Logsdon. Tommy Smith was a third-year student at a local college. His girlfriend, Jennifer Logsdon, had just finished her first year at the same school before they met. Jennifer had been living in the dorms, but was bored with the constant partying. She wanted a quieter place to study when her longtime friend, Casey Johnson, decided to attend the same college. They saw a great opportunity to rent a house together. They all agreed on a small rental home in Peoria, Illinois, and pooled their money to make it work. Everything seemed fine until a hot summer day. On July 19, 1991, at that time, 20 years old, Tommy and his 19-year-old fiancée, Jennifer, were busy preparing for their wedding. They planned to start a family after finishing their education and securing jobs. They are enjoying the weekend. With Casey, the 3 of them had been living together for a while, getting along well and supporting each other. Tommy and Jennifer even intended to continue living in the house after their wedding. On the evening of July 19, 1991, Tommy, Jennifer, and Casey gathered to watch a movie together. They chose a horror film by Stephen King. They set up a mattress taken from the bedroom, prepared some snacks, and made themselves comfortable. It seemed like a typical evening, and no one could predict the nightmare that was about to unfold. After a while, Jennifer fell asleep, followed by Tommy, while Casey went to a different room to sleep. In the middle of the night, Jennifer woke up to a terrifying scream coming from nearby. Feeling confused and bewildered in the darkness, she noticed Tommy fighting with a stranger. The attacker was a large black man with bloodshot eyes and a knife in his hand. Despite looking very intimidating, Tommy fought fiercely with the attacker, who struck him with many powerful blows. Obviously, this tall man was stronger and more aggressive than Tommy, but Tommy still fought back with all his might. Jennifer felt confused and helpless. She noticed something strange. The attacker had socks on his hands while his feet were bare. She realized that Tommy was losing strength, but she herself was unable to move due to shock and fear. Tommy was attacked in the chest and neck when Tommy collapsed. Jennifer knew that the attacker was going to continue. He aimed at her and attacked with the knife, desperately. Jennifer fought back with all her strength. At one point, she managed to overpower the attacker and take the knife from him, but she had already sustained serious injuries and could no longer fight. The knife slipped from her hand and fell to the floor. The attacker picked up the knife again and attacked her, quickly knocking her unconscious. At that moment, a conversation could be heard coming from the room where Casey was sleeping. Realizing the danger, Casey called 911 for help. Unfortunately, the connection was poor, or the operator was distracted. As they repeatedly asked for information, the attacker, hearing the commotion, became enraged. He seemed to want to kill her. He broke the lock and rushed into the room. Casey barely had time to finish her sentence and hung up on emergency services because he attacked her. Casey pleaded for her life, begging him not to hurt her. However, the assailant lunged at Casey, striking her in the face and chest. Despite her efforts to defend herself, she was overpowered by the attacker during the struggle. The knife blade became badly bent and eventually broke off from the handle, leaving the assailant without a weapon. By this time, Casey had already suffered several serious injuries, including to her throat. After the incident, the attacker picked up the broken blade and fled the scene. Fortunately, Casey managed to call the police. Officers arrived at the house around 3 a.m. Upon entering, they were met with a horrifying sight: items scattered and equipment damaged, indicating that a violent struggle had taken place. Amidst the chaos, they found Tommy lying unconscious on the floor, with multiple injuries. Despite his injuries, he bravely protected Jennifer and Casey. Fortunately, Jennifer and Casey were still alive and remained conscious for several minutes after the police arrived. Paramedics were on the scene. Attempting to save them, Jennifer seemed to be the most distressed. She expressed her fear of death and begged for help for Tommy and Casey. At that time, her boyfriend, Tommy, was unconscious, very pale, and had lost a lot of blood, but he was still breathing. Afterward, both Jennifer and Casey believed that they had survived the attack thanks to Tommy's brave actions. The attacker hit Tommy so hard that his knife bent and he lost much of his strength as a result. He was no longer able to inflict deep wounds, only superficial ones, however. Without immediate medical attention, both Jennifer and Casey would have died from blood loss. Fortunately, help arrived in time, and they were saved. They were taken to the hospital and placed in the intensive care unit. Their lives were very fragile. Tommy, however, was not as fortunate. He sustained the most severe injuries and bled to death. Passing away just after the paramedics arrived, his family was not surprised by his actions. They felt immense pride in him. Tommy was always selfless and loving, a true hero who protected Jennifer and Casey. Jennifer believed he would have made a wonderful husband and father, with a bright future ahead of him. Sadly, she never had the chance to experience that future. Investigators aimed to gather information about the attacker to begin their search. This individual was clearly dangerous and posed a threat to society, potentially targeting more victims at that very moment. Although the attacker was not masked, the darkness made it impossible for Casey and Jennifer to provide a detailed description. They could only say he was a strong black man. However, they did recall an important detail. He had socks on his hands and was barefoot. It appeared he had put on gloves just before the attack to avoid leaving fingerprints. But he did leave footprints, which could help identify him. Given this information, the police concluded that the suspect likely lived nearby, as it would be difficult to walk long distances on asphalt without shoes. This insight helped the officers narrow down their list of potential suspects to those with prior assault convictions. One suspect was ruled out because he was already in custody for another crime. Another young man, known for violent offenses, had a solid alibi. That was confirmed. The police had only one suspect left to investigate: Jennifer's neighbor, Jean Brown, 27 years old, who lived across the street. When the police went to Jean's house to check, they found a blood stain on the mosquito netting of a window. Jean explained that the blood came from a cut he had sustained in the kitchen the night before. However, this explanation was not convincing and made him the prime suspect. He was taken to the police station for questioning. Meanwhile, the forensic scientist was investigating the crime scene for evidence and found several important clues. One clue was an invitation to a party that Jennifer, Tommy, and Casey were planning for the following weekend. It had fallen to the floor during the struggle. They also found human footprints on the ground. These footprints indicated that the attacker was barefoot, which could lead to valuable clues upon comparison. It was determined that the footprint matched Jean Brown's. Additionally, forensic experts discovered tiny drops of blood in his hair. Jean understood that he was facing serious charges that could result in severe penalties. The investigators were pressuring him and encouraging him to confess so that he could receive a lighter sentence. Eventually, Jean began to share his version of events. He claimed that he only intended to confront Tommy, but when Tommy resisted, he lost control. Jean noticed that Jennifer had woken up, and, in a panic, he attacked her as well. Hearing a noise from Casey's room, he thought his only option to avoid arrest was to eliminate everyone in the house. However, he could not explain why he attacked them. The police were actively gathering evidence, confirming that Jean had broken into the house at night with the intention of stealing money and purchasing banned substances, a claim he later made in order not to leave fingerprints. He wore socks on his hands. However, he did not know that footprints were as distinctive as fingerprints. If he had realized this, he might have worn socks on his feet too. His testimony sounds like a detective story, but in reality, it is very unconvincing. Using a knife to try to steal just a few dollars seems absurd. The choice of a house where 3 unemployed students live together may seem strange. What was his plan? How could he buy banned substances without a strategy? These questions didn't align with the overall situation, and it seemed unimaginable that a small robbery could end with 3 people being brutally harmed. In this situation, investigators suspect that Jean's real targets were Casey and Jennifer. He may have wanted to abuse them. Perhaps that was the reason he attacked Tommy first. To eliminate the main threat to his plan, it appears Jean underestimated Tommy's resistance. After dealing with Tommy, he noticed that Jennifer had woken up and that Casey was already calling for emergency help. At that moment, Jean's plan began to fail. In a hurry, he turned his attention to Casey and Jennifer, believing he had already killed Tommy and Jennifer. He quickly tried to attack Casey, grabbed her purse, and fled with a broken knife. The investigation revealed that Tommy was the one who managed to wear out Jean during a prolonged struggle, although he fought bravely. Tommy sustained severe injuries. Casey played a crucial role in the fight. She managed to bend the knife blade and even knocked it out of Jean's hand. After that, the knife became more difficult to wield. Jennifer also suffered injuries, making her one of the most affected individuals alongside Tommy. Jennifer spent a significant amount of time in the intensive care unit, teetering between life and death, in addition to several stab wounds. She had a punctured lung. Fortunately, both she and Casey miraculously survived. Despite doctors' warning that they were extremely close to death, however, they continued to deal with the aftermath of the traumatic experience. One troubling aspect of the investigation was the apparent indifference of the neighbors. They lived in a quiet suburban area, known for its low crime rate, where there is almost no noise at night. Casey, Tommy, and Jennifer cried out for help, but local residents reported that no one heard their screams, not even the nearby neighbors. This silence allowed Jean to leave the scene of the crime and return home without being noticed. If Casey hadn't managed to call for help, she and Jennifer would have bled to death without any chance of survival. Casey was the youngest person present during the attack, only 17 years old. Despite this, she fought back bravely, suffering many injuries in the process. After that, Jean took his crime knife before running away, leaving Casey behind because she pretended to be dead. What ultimately saved her was a call to emergency services. It is hard to imagine the horrors that would have befallen Casey, and Jennifer had Casey not successfully called for help. At this point, the 911 dispatcher's response raised many concerns, and the public was outraged by his slow reaction due to a poor connection or lack of experience. He had difficulty responding quickly. He repeatedly asked for clarification, revealing his uncertainty. This delay was significant, and a quicker response might have saved Tommy during the subsequent interrogation. Jean provided more details about that tragic night. He claimed that he had been at home all day and that he was using banned substances, with his last use occurring just before dinner with his family. Then, when he ran out of banned substances, he decided to rob two young neighbors, Casey and Jennifer. For some reason, he was unaware that Tommy lived there permanently and that they had no money. It seemed that he had not planned the crime. It was a spur-of-the-moment decision. Jean was looking for an easy way to get money through theft so he could buy more banned substances. Jean had invaded their home with extreme brutality, shocking the community once again. The incident drew attention, particularly because it involved Jean, an African American, and banned substances. It was a senseless attack on young, promising individuals. Detectives suggested that the motives behind this aggression could include financial gain, a need for intimacy, and possibly envy and hatred towards more successful individuals, specifically attractive young women like Casey and Jennifer. It seemed he aimed to destroy something beautiful. The robbery appeared to be a tactic to lessen his culpability and secure a lighter sentence. However, these were empty justifications, given that the victims included the deceased Tommy and two seriously injured girls, Casey and Jennifer. Consequently, Jean faced charges of attempted murder and first-degree murder at the time of his arrest. He was married and had a son. His family was shocked that he chose a life of crime and banned substances instead of a normal life, ultimately severing ties with him nonetheless. They weren't entirely surprised by the incident. This was not his first crime. He had previously committed robberies and engaged with banned substances. However, his earlier criminal behavior had not been as brutally violent due to the overwhelming evidence and Jean's confession. Investigators quickly secured a search warrant for his house. In his room, they found physical evidence. He had not managed to dispose of the items. Forensic experts discovered that these items were soaked in blood. DNA testing confirmed that the blood belonged to Tommy, Casey, and Jennifer. However, by that time, Jean began to retract his statements. He claimed that he was cut by broken glass while taking out the trash in the evening, causing injuries to his arms and legs. To challenge Jean's account, special tests were conducted. It is common for criminals to injure themselves during knife attacks, particularly when the knife strikes a hard surface like a bone. This can cause the hand to slip onto the blade. Jean had cuts that matched the typical injuries seen in such cases. His hands and the knife were covered in blood, and he often displayed aggressive behavior. But at that moment, he was so enraged that he did not feel pain, given that Jean was a suspect from the beginning of the investigation and that sufficient evidence was found against him. Resisting was futile. In addition to the items found in his room, they also discovered a deformed knife blade from a pen that he had taken with him. The strongest evidence against Jean was microscopic blood droplets from Tommy found in his hair. This evidence provided enough reason to file charges. He was arrested just hours after the massacre, leaving him no time to dispose of the evidence. At that time, the crime was punishable by death, a penalty that was abolished in 2011. The defense attorney began to build a case, claiming that Jean was insane, arguing that he was unaware of his actions. They pointed to the fact that he did not attempt to destroy any evidence, as the murder knife was discovered in his home, along with other incriminating documents. Additionally, The attorney noted that Gene did not wash off the blood or change his clothes, which could indicate that he was not in a sober state. They also highlighted the numerous cuts on his hands as further evidence of his mental state. The attorney even considered arguing that Gene had attempted to end his life throughout the process. The defense aimed to portray Gene in a more sympathetic light to lessen his punishment. Gene supported this narrative by claiming that he could not remember parts of the attack and attributing his actions to intoxication and the use of a banned substance. The prosecutor's office stated that this violent attack was carried out with extreme cruelty. Gene's actions showed no signs of emotional distress or insanity. He broke into a house and attacked 3 young people, Tommy, Casey, and Jennifer, who posed no threat to him. His actions were completely unjustified. The prosecutor's office also noted that robbery was a factor in the attack, which is indirectly supported by the small amount of stolen items. Gene could have taken more valuable possessions, but only grabbed Casey's purse, which had little money in it, as he fled. Furthermore, they believe Gene targeted the house primarily because he had malicious intentions toward Casey and Jennifer, with Tommy being the main obstacle. However, Gene's testimony changed several times. Leading up to the trial, he eventually claimed that he did not attack Tommy with a knife. Unexpectedly, he stated that Tommy was the one who grabbed the knife and used it against him. Gene insisted that he overpowered Tommy and took the knife during their struggle. He later fell into a state of emotional distress. Furthermore, Gene denied any intention to rob, claiming he had no idea how he ended up in their house. He attributed his confusion to his unstable mental state during the altercation. A knife handle was discovered at the scene. It seems Gene lost it during the struggle, and since he was fleeing in the dark, he didn't have time to retrieve it, leaving his fingerprints on it. At that moment, Tommy was not involved with the knife. Gene's actions suggested that his intentions were more malicious than he claimed. He didn't wear a mask and appeared unconcerned about being recognized, likely because he didn't expect anyone else to be in the house. If his goal was merely to steal money, there would have been no reason for him to attack them. Gene confronted Tommy while he was asleep, and there was no indication that Tommy had noticed him or attempted to fight him off. During the trial, a statement from one of the detectives sparked controversy. He praised Tommy for his bravery in confronting Gene, which he claimed saved the lives of Casey and Jennifer. However, this account contradicted the widely accepted version of the incident. According to the detective, Tommy had tried to detain Gene, engaged in a struggle, and attempted to hold him down until the police arrived. Yet, there was no evidence to support this claim. Moreover, even if Tommy had tried, it clearly failed, as Gene managed to injure Casey and Jennifer and escape. Eventually, this version of the incident was dismissed. Surprisingly, Tommy's mother chose not to pursue the death penalty for Gene. Despite having lost her only son, she found the idea of Gene's mother grieving over her child's coffin because of her decision unbearable. Although Gene attempted to show remorse, the jury did not believe him. To avoid the death penalty, he struck a deal with the prosecution. He expressed regret for killing Tommy Smith and stated that he would rather end his life than have caused this pain. He mentioned that if he had known that the banned substance would lead to this, he would never have used it. By pleading guilty to murder and attempted double murder, Gene avoided execution. He was sentenced to life in prison for Tommy's murder, along with an additional 30 years for each of the attacks on Casey and Jennifer, and 15 years for burglary. Gene was incarcerated on January 16, 1992. After the verdict, the lawyer submitted several appeals, suggesting there might be a change in the case. However, these claims were quickly dismissed due to the overwhelming evidence against Gene. He is currently serving his sentence at the Illinois Correctional Center. Casey and Jennifer are still recovering from the incident. They will always carry scars from the injuries inflicted by Gene. The emotional trauma was even more severe. Jennifer struggled for a long time to cope with Tommy's death, but eventually, she found a way to move forward. Despite Jean's apologies, Casey and Jennifer could never accept them. They believed that the only appropriate punishment for Jean was execution, as he could not make amends for the harm he caused by killing Tommy, Casey, and Jennifer, who miraculously survived this senseless act of violence, vowed to prevent any attempts by Jean to gain release from prison, given the seriousness of his crimes. It is unlikely that he will ever leave prison after the incident. His wife distanced herself from him, significantly limiting his contact with their child.
What keeps a marriage together when love, trust, and respect are absent? Some people attempt to maintain the family for the sake of their children, while others worry about what others might think. Additionally, some may feel restrained by their religious beliefs, or a combination of these factors. However, the intense desire to save a marriage at any cost can sometimes lead to devastating outcomes. The story of Jacqueline and Paul Krimble is not one of a kind, but it gained a lot of attention because of its brutal nature, greed, and lack of morals. The perpetrator was called the Black Widow and was imprisoned. However, in a revealing interview, her daughter admitted that Jacqueline showed her cruelty even while in prison. Jacqueline, known as Jackie, was born in 1974 in County Armagh, Northern Ireland. She was the youngest of 2 children in a typical middle-class family. Since childhood, Jacqueline displayed erratic, spoiled, defiant, and occasionally aggressive behavior. As a teenager, her actions became increasingly unmanageable, but her family attributed this to typical adolescent issues, believing she would eventually outgrow it. In high school, Jacqueline met Paul Krimble, who was 3 years older than her and very different in personality. Despite their differences, they were drawn to each other, a classic example of opposites attracting. Paul was humble and shy. Coming from a religious background, he was a good student, recognized for his talents. Jacqueline's boldness, confidence captivated him. She was the first girl he had serious feelings for, and likely the only one. Jacqueline's parents were supportive of her relationship with Paul, believing he would help her become more calm and sensible. It often felt like they treated Paul better than Jacqueline, welcoming him into the family from the very first meeting. In contrast, Paul's parents were cautious about his choice, but they allowed the relationship to continue. Friends from school noticed that Jacqueline and Paul seemed mismatched. Jacqueline frequently instigated conflicts and preferred to settle matters with physical confrontations, while Paul always sought peaceful solutions. He was known for being friendly, open-minded, and responsible, consistently keeping his promises and ready to lend a helping hand. Paul was described as a kind, sensible, and mature young man, displaying wisdom beyond his years. At 17, Jacqueline became pregnant by her boyfriend, Paul, who was 20 and already in college. She told him right away. Upon hearing the news, Paul immediately stated that he was ready to marry her, take full responsibility for her and the baby. Jacqueline felt unprepared for family life and raising a child. However, terminating the pregnancy was not an option for her, as neither she nor Paul, belonging to a religious family, could consider it. Paul decided to buy an engagement ring and proposed to Jacqueline, who accepted. They had a simple wedding in 1992, celebrating with their closest family and friends. A few days before the event, Paul shared with his best friend that he and Jacqueline were fundamentally different in many ways. He had doubts about how genuine her feelings were and even felt afraid of her temper. Paul also questioned whether his feelings for her were true love or simply sympathy and obligation. Since he had never been in a relationship with anyone else, he had no basis for comparison. His friend listened carefully and cautioned Paul against going through with the marriage, suggesting it could be the biggest mistake of his life and might lead to lifelong unhappiness. Despite this advice, Paul was resolute. He felt he couldn't abandon Jacqueline, who was expecting their child. He believed that becoming a mother would positively change Jacqueline, making her more gentle and calm. Paul hoped for a positive future, but he was unaware of how mistaken he was. Family life without love began to reveal itself. In early 1993, they had their first child, a daughter named Danielle. 6 years later, Jacqueline gave birth to their son. Paul worked hard to support his family and ensured they had everything they needed. After their second child was born, the Crimbles decided to move to a larger home and bought a cozy 3-bedroom townhouse in Armagh, relocating in 2000. By that time, Paul had a senior position in mechanical engineering and was earning a good salary. Meanwhile, his wife chose not to work, saying she preferred to take care of the household and the children. Unfortunately, she wasn't very good at these tasks. Jacqueline was often selfish, lazy, quick-tempered, and displayed aggression, even toward their children. As the children got older, Jacqueline attempted to find a job, but her argumentative and confrontational nature led to her being frequently unemployed. Instead of working, she spent most evenings at bars, drinking alcohol, while her husband stayed home to care for their daughter and son. When sober, Jacqueline was not very pleasant, but when she drank, she became aggressive, instigating conflicts, getting into fights, using offensive language, and behaving inappropriately with various men. Any attempts to ask her to behave more appropriately were met with hostility, making her unpredictable. Neighbors and family friends were aware of the situation, felt sympathy for Paul and the children, who were most affected by Jacqueline's behavior. Living in a small, quiet town, many people knew about her troubles and tried to steer clear of her. Her negative reputation impacted her husband and children, causing them to face issues with their peers at school. Jacqueline instilled fear in her family, as she could become aggressive at any time. Paul tried to tolerate the situation, but it was evident to his friends, family, and co-workers that he was uncomfortable around Jacqueline, or even when she was mentioned. Many advised him to leave her, but Paul was worried about losing custody of their children. During disagreements, Jacqueline would quickly threaten to prevent him from seeing their daughter and son. She also warned him that she could enlist her male acquaintances from bars to harm him. Consequently, Paul often surrendered to her demands and remained quiet. On the morning of June 20th, 2004, Jacqueline called emergency services, urgently asking for help. She reported that 3 strangers had invaded her home, attacking both her and her husband. They had tied them up and attempted to rob them before escaping in their car, taking her husband with them. When police officers and medics arrived at their home, they found Jacqueline with her hands bound behind her back using a plastic cable tie, but her legs were free, suggesting she had managed to partially escape. Interestingly, she showed no visible injuries or bruises, despite claiming that the attackers had beaten them. Thankfully, their children were not at home, as they had gone to spend the weekend with their paternal grandparents. Jacqueline recounted that the night before, she and her husband had gone to a bar to unwind. After having a few drinks, they returned home after midnight. As Paul was about to open the front door, 3 masked individuals suddenly emerged from the shadows and forced their way inside. The intruders, armed with a gun, restrained the couple, physically attacked them, demanded money, and banned substance. Paul attempted to compromise with them, pleading for their release and promising not to contact the police. But this only made the attackers more aggressive. They struck him multiple times and began to suffocate him with a plastic bag, while Jacqueline looked on in horror. When the intruders realized there was no cash or illegal substances in the house, they decided to take the car, but inexplicably took Paul with them, leaving Jacqueline tied up and alone. After the criminals took Paul away, Jacqueline was able to reach the phone and call the police, using her toe to dial. She believed her husband might still be alive and urgently pleaded with the detectives to rescue him. Despite her frantic situation, Jacqueline seemed unusually calm, but the authorities found no reason to doubt her at the time. The investigators to start gathering evidence at the crime scene. They sought any information about the attackers, but Jacqueline stated that the criminals wore masks and she couldn't remember any distinguishing features like their clothing, speech, or physical traits. All she could confirm was that there were 3 male assailants. By Monday morning, less than a day after the attack, the search had begun. The Crimble family's car was found abandoned 3 miles from their home, parked in a deserted alley next to an empty house. Inside the trunk, authorities discovered the mutilated body of Paul. he showed clear signs of beating and torture. His hands were tied behind his back, his legs were bound with a cable tie, and his body was marked with numerous bruises. These criminals left no evidence behind, which was odd. When Jacqueline was informed about this horrifying discovery, she remained calm. It seemed that the violent loss of her husband, the father of her children, did not affect her much. Although she attempted to show surprise and grief, she did not shed a single tear and instead asked when she would be able to get her car back. Her unusual reaction raised suspicions, leading the police to scrutinize her. At first, Jacqueline's story was accepted without question and regarded as the only trustworthy version of events. However, her odd behavior as a widowed mother of two raised doubts among law enforcement, leading them to suspect she might be dishonest. Investigations revealed that her marriage to Paul had been deteriorating for a long time, and she was not an exemplary wife or mother. Neighbors, acquaintances, even her own children and parents had negative things to say about her. Additionally, it emerged that Jacqueline had been involved with a man named Roger Ferguson for several months. Roger, who lived with his mother on a farm in Armagh, was frequently seen with Jacqueline at various entertainment spots in town, where they were drinking. He would also visit her at home while her husband was at work and the children were at school and daycare. A day after the disfigured body was discovered in a car, Jacqueline went from being seen as a victim to the primary suspect, with Roger now viewed as a potential accomplice. While there were no reports of suspicious individuals seen in town, nearly everyone who had interacted with the victim shared negative opinions about her. It was soon discovered that the deceased man had an insurance policy worth £300,000 British pound, which would go to his wife upon his death. This created a potential motive for the investigation. Before, Jacqueline stated that she was able to call for help by using her toe on a button phone. However, during the first inspection of the crime scene, investigators observed that the phone was on the coffee table face down, while her hands were tied behind her back. This made it impossible for her to have flipped the phone over after making the call or to have dialed for help if it had been in that position from the beginning. Their computer search history showed unusual inquiries. Someone had been searching for information about life insurance payouts and procedures related to the death of a policyholder for several months. When Jacqueline was questioned about this, she insisted she had no knowledge of it and suggested that Paul might be interested. Roger, suspected of being an accomplice in the crime, had a strong alibi. His mother stated that he had stayed home all night because he was feeling unwell. She mentioned that, around 1:30 a.m., she was looking in the medicine cabinet for something to treat his stomach problems. Despite her convincing account, police did not remove her son from the list of suspects. The police tracked the suspects' locations on the night of the crime using their cell phone signals and found that Roger was not at home, as his mother had claimed. Instead, he was at the Crimble's house for several hours. Roger continued his relationship with Jacqueline, and they were seen together at a bar the day after Paul's funeral. Interestingly, Jacqueline and Roger also visited a car dealership together to look at SUVs and discuss financing options for such a costly purchase. Roger's mother was with them during this visit, which raised further suspicions. The police believed that they had already made plans for how to use the insurance money following Paul's death, and they suspected that Roger's mother was likely aware of this. During interrogations, Jacqueline maintained that she never cheated on her husband and had no intention of harming him, but no one believed her anymore. Before the tragedy, she had started a job as a caregiver at a nursing home, but was fired within weeks due to ongoing conflicts and dishonesty. Despite this, she didn't inform her husband and pretended to go to work or have night shifts while staying at her lover Roger's house. Her deception was uncovered by chance when Paul met one of Jacqueline's former colleagues, who revealed the truth to him. When Paul confronted Jacqueline, it led to another heated argument. She threatened to leave him for her lover, take the children, and prevent him from interacting with them, which became Paul's biggest fear. To avoid losing his family, he chose to overlook her infidelity and could only confide in his closest friend, who later served as a witness in court, recounting Paul's situation. A cunning plan was in the works. Roger was not very bright. He was somewhat gullible and easily influenced. Jacqueline quickly took control over him, using her charm to make him do whatever she wanted. He would readily fight for her, which made her feel important. He was likely in love with her and believed everything she said. Meanwhile, Jacqueline complained to Roger about her husband, claiming he was rude, cruel, even abusive. Although these accusations were untrue, with each complaint, Roger grew to hate Paul more, thinking he was hurting Jacqueline and was the main reason for their unhappiness. Jacqueline planted the idea in Roger's mind that if her husband were gone, all their problems would disappear, allowing them to be together while also gaining a significant amount of money for a comfortable life. About 2 weeks before the tragedy, Jacqueline looked for people to help her commit the crime for money. However, after thinking it over, she and Roger decided against that plan. They believed they could do it themselves without leaving evidence or witnesses, ensuring they would receive the full insurance payout. On Friday, June 18th, Jacqueline took the children to spend the weekend with their grandparents. On Saturday, she encouraged her husband, Paul, to go out for drinks, to unwind and have a conversation. Paul happily agreed, believing it could improve their relationship, but he didn't realize it was a setup for something far worse. That night, patrons at the bar observed Jacqueline making significant efforts to intoxicate her husband, who doesn't drink. She bought multiple drinks and nearly forced him to take one shot after another. After midnight, she helped her unsteady husband leave the bar, and they were captured on surveillance cameras. This was the last time Paul was seen alive. The investigation uncovered a major timing issue. The bar was a 10-minute walk from the Crimble home, and the attack happened right after they returned, lasting no more than 15 minutes. Jacqueline stated that her husband was kidnapped afterward and taken away in their car, prompting her to call the police immediately. However, there was a gap of about an hour and a half between when they were captured on camera and when she contacted the police. Investigators suspected that this time was used by the perpetrators to cover up their actions and make the attack appear to have been committed by other individuals. Additionally, it seemed that Jacqueline deliberately got her husband drunk so he would be unable to fight back. She claimed that the attackers kicked Paul while he was incapacitated and then began to strangle him by placing a plastic bag over his head and securing it with tape. The injuries found on the deceased confirmed her story, but by that point, the police were almost certain that the attackers were Jacqueline and her lover, Roger Ferguson. After a thorough investigation of the crime scene, clear evidence was uncovered. Detectives found a partially erased footprint of a man's shoe that had been poorly cleaned. The tread pattern matched Roger's shoes, but this alone is considered circumstantial evidence. More concrete evidence against the criminal couple emerged as well. In the kitchen trash, detectives discovered a cigarette butt with Roger's saliva on it, and a partial fingerprint from him was located on the cable tie that bound Jacqueline's hands. Additionally, Roger's fingerprints were found on the ties that bound the victim's hands and feet. The bag used to suffocate the victim contained sweat and oil traces from both of the suspects. The investigation revealed another person involved in this violent crime, Colin Robinson, 17, a minor acquaintance of Roger. On the night of the attack, Roger called Colin to ask for an unspecified favor. Following Roger's instructions, Colin parked his car at the end of the street and walked to the house to avoid drawing attention. However, when Colin realized the situation, he wanted to escape, but Roger threatened him with a knife and coerced him into helping move the body into the car's trunk. Afterward, they drove the car to a secluded area and abandoned it. Initially, Colin denied any involvement in the crime, but during a second interrogation, he broke down and started to confess. The trial and sentencing took place after a thorough investigation that lasted several months. During this period, investigators collected solid evidence, interviewed witnesses, and obtained a confession from the third person involved in the crime. However, the trial only started in spring 2007, nearly 3 years after Paul Crimble was killed. On May 7, 2007, Jacqueline Crimble and Roger Ferguson were convicted of premeditated murder with the intent of collecting insurance money. Jacqueline received a 20-year prison sentence, while Roger, her lover and accomplice, was sentenced to 18 years. Colin Robinson, the young accomplice, received a 3-year sentence for aiding the criminals and trying to conceal the criminal. Additionally, Roger's elderly mother was also held accountable for perjury and giving a false alibi for her son. Given her old age and serious health issues, she was sentenced to only 1 year of probation. Jacqueline sought revenge on her own children. Even while in prison, she felt bitterness towards her family for not supporting her during her trial and for their relief at her imprisonment. Her own mother even stated that people like Jacqueline should be kept away from society to prevent them from causing harm. Strikingly, just days after her husband's funeral, Jacqueline destroyed all of his belongings and photographs, wanting nothing to remind her of him. However, Danielle managed to save a few pictures of her father, hiding them in her bedside table without her mother's knowledge. The £300,000 insurance payout, for which Paul was murdered, went to his children. The children lost both of their parents in an instant, but their difficulties continued. Their mother was fiercely opposed to allowing either her parents or the parents of her deceased husband to take care of them. She fought hard to deny them guardianship rights, which led to the children entering foster care, even though they had living grandparents. At the time of the tragedy, Danielle was just 11 years old, and her brother was only 5. Jacqueline managed to keep her parental rights and tried to manipulate her children from prison. She wanted them to publicly claim her innocence and used various pressure tactics to do so. For instance, she promised to approve their school trips if they visited her in prison, but she tricked them. During the visit, she insisted they testify for her and refused to sign the permission slip. As a result, they were the only ones in their class who couldn't go on weekend trips. Danielle is now living in Basingstoke, working at a daycare and in a relationship with Simon Bryce, an engineer, her brother, who has a solid education and has relocated to London. The harrowing tale of Jacqueline and Paul Crimble underscores the devastating consequences of a marriage sustained by obligation rather than love, trust, or respect. Jacqueline's calculated murder of her husband, driven by greed for a £300,000 insurance payout and executed with chilling ruthlessness alongside her lover, Roger Ferguson, not only claimed Paul's life, but also irreparably fractured their family. The children, Danielle, and her younger brother were left to grapple with the loss of their devoted father and the betrayal of a mother whose cruelty persisted even from behind bars. Despite inheriting the insurance money, no financial remedy could heal the emotional wounds inflicted by Jacqueline's actions or restore the stability stolen from their childhoods. This case serves as a stark cautionary tale. Clinging to a toxic relationship under the guise of duty or societal pressure can lead to catastrophic outcomes, leaving a trail of heartbreak and irreparable loss. It was a calm night in the semi-rural Melbourne suburb of Mornington. A small family was getting ready for bed. A pregnant mother was sleeping upstairs, her little girl was tucked in her bed, and the father was quietly moving around the house. Everything seemed normal, no loud arguments, no signs of trouble. By the next morning, things were seriously wrong. What really took place that night? John Miles Sharp was born on February 28, 1967, in the small coastal town of Mornington, Victoria. He was the middle child in a large family with 6 siblings. Unlike his siblings, John was quite different. He was withdrawn, quiet, and struggled with extreme shyness. From a young age, he found social situations overwhelming, which often left him feeling drained. While his brothers and sisters easily made friends and played with others, John stayed on the sidelines, dealing with anxiety and feeling out of place. His closest relationships were with his parents, as he found the outside world to be unfriendly and unwelcoming. School was not a refuge for him. He had a few classmates he talked to, but no genuine friendships and no one to share his thoughts with. Nonetheless, he persevered and graduated. By the 1990s, he found a job at the Commonwealth Bank, and that's when everything started to change. Anna Kemp entered John's life like a ray of sunshine. She was cheerful, outgoing, and full of energy, a confident, intelligent woman from New Zealand. At 27, John was younger than Anna, who was 31. Despite their differences, they were drawn to each other. Anna's warmth complemented John's quiet steadiness. Working together every day allowed them to grow closer, and soon they fell in love. After a year of dating, they officially became a couple and married in October 1994. Although Anna was far from her family in New Zealand, she maintained a strong connection with them, especially her mother. They often spoke on the phone, sharing love, encouragement, and updates about her new life in Australia. Anna came from a deeply religious background, and her faith was a strong foundation for her life. For her, marriage was not just a legal contract, but a sacred commitment. After the ceremony, once they settled in and the honeymoon phase passed, Anna began to notice something she hadn't recognized before. John had changed. He became quieter, colder, and emotionally distant. She later shared with friends and family that it felt like something vital had been turned off. The relationship suddenly felt empty, lacking passion. Although John would have outbursts of anger, Anna remained committed because she believed in their vows, in making an effort, and in the importance of giving it time. In August 2002, Anna experienced immense joy with the birth of her daughter, Gracie. Becoming a mother was one of the happiest moments of her life. However, shortly after Gracie was born, doctors diagnosed her with hip dysplasia, which meant she needed to wear a corrective orthopedic brace for the first 3 months. This made for a difficult start. Anna spent sleepless nights caring for Gracie and adjusting to her new role as a mother. In contrast, John struggled to connect with their daughter. From the beginning, he was distant, showing no warmth or affection. Multiple sources indicated that he felt resentment towards Gracie, even going so far as to call her a harsh name that revealed a troubling lack of empathy. Her cries frustrated him, and her needs interrupted his life. The marriage was falling apart. Anna shared with her family that there was constant tension in the house. Communication was minimal, and even minor decisions turned into arguments. She wondered if their difficulties were due to lack of sleep or if they were simply going through a tough time. Anna hoped that as Gracie got older, things would improve. Unfortunately, the situation only grew more unstable. Shortly after Gracie was born, John made a significant choice. He quit his job at the bank. He began working from home as a conveyancer, handling the legal paperwork for real estate transactions. This change provided him with flexibility and independence. He operated his business from a small office in their home, becoming even more isolated than before, as he was already a withdrawn person. As time passed, Anna noticed that John's choice wasn't driven by ambition, but rather by a desire to escape. He was struggling with the pressures of his job, the extended hours, relentless demands, and interactions with others. John found this environment overwhelming, as he was not naturally social. Dealing with clients, leading a team, and navigating a busy workplace exhausted him more than he admitted. Now, he was trying to avoid it all. In September 2003, a significant change occurred for the family. John and Anna purchased a new house. This house was bigger and located just a few streets from John's childhood home, where his parents still resided. While it seemed like the start of a new chapter, the atmosphere inside felt different. Instead of laughter, the walls of their new home were filled with silence. The tension between John and Anna was not only present, it was intensifying. In November, Anna discovered she was pregnant again, this time with a boy. She was excited and shared the news with a close friend. Their little girl, Gracie, would soon have a sibling. However, John's reaction crushed that dream. He didn't smile, hug her, or show any joy. Instead, he questioned whether the baby was really his. Anna later shared with her loved ones that John harbored resentment. Instead of celebrating the news of the second pregnancy, he reacted with cold irritation. He wasn't simply indifferent, he was deeply troubled. To him, the pregnancy felt like an added burden rather than a blessing. He began to struggle emotionally, finding it hard to sleep and hardly speaking to anyone. He withdrew into himself, becoming increasingly silent and irritable. Eventually, he consulted a doctor and was diagnosed with insomnia. Although he was given sleeping pills, they were ineffective. Night after night, he lay awake in darkness, consumed by thoughts that told him everything was going wrong, that life was overwhelming, that no one understood him, and that it would be easier if he didn't have to keep up the facade of being a supportive husband, father, and man who had everything under control. On March 23, 2004, Anna was in her second trimester of pregnancy. That day, the whole family, John, Anna, and Gracie, went to a birthday party for their nephew. To everyone else, they seemed like an ideal family. Anna had already picked out a name for the baby, Francis. Even a close friend who had been staying with them that week noticed nothing out of the ordinary. They looked like any typical family. The next morning, Anna dropped Gracie off at nursery school as usual. Later that day, she called a friend, and they arranged to meet in a few days. The day after that, she reached out to her private health insurer to add her unborn child to her policy. 2 days later, on March 23rd, an argument occurred. The specifics of the conversation are unclear, but it was serious. That night, after the argument, they went to bed around 9 to 10 p.m. Anna was likely asleep when John got up, walked downstairs to the garage, and retrieved a spear gun. He then returned to the bedroom and shot his pregnant wife in the left temple. When she did not die immediately, he shot her again. Afterward, he covered her bloodied body with a blanket and went downstairs to sleep on the couch. The entire incident took only a few minutes. The next morning, John got up, dressed Gracie, and took her to nursery as if everything was normal. He started to fabricate a story, claiming that Anna had left him for another man and that she intended to come back in a few days to pick up Gracie. However, Anna's family didn't believe him. They tried to reach her through calls and messages, but received no response. This silence was incredibly frustrating for her mother, as Anna had always been in touch, even when she traveled abroad. Now, there was only silence. Worried and increasingly frantic, Anna's mother reached out to her local parish priest in New Zealand, who had known the family for many years. She explained that she hadn't heard from Anna since Monday, despite sending messages that had gone unread. The priest noticed her distress and recognized that Anna's silence meant something was wrong. He decided to take action and contacted the police in New Zealand. As a parish priest and a respected member of the community, his worries were treated with utmost seriousness. Soon, investigators would start uncovering the truth behind John's elaborate deception, revealing a situation much more troubling than anyone could have expected. Initially, authorities did not regard the situation as a criminal case. They believed that Anna might just need some time alone, possibly to avoid difficult conversations or feelings of embarrassment. However, as days passed, her silence became increasingly concerning. The New Zealand police decided to take the situation more seriously and transferred the case to Australian officials. Officers in Victoria were then asked to conduct a welfare check at Anna's home in Mornington. Anna had a meeting planned with a close friend on March 26th, with the time and location already confirmed. However, before the meeting could take place, an unusual event unfolded. The friend received a phone call from John, who informed her that Anna would not be attending. He shared the same story he had told others, that Anna had left him and Gracie for another man. The friend was shocked. She had known Anna for years, and they had shared everything, so this news was hard to believe. Nevertheless, she felt a strong instinct to not ignore what she had heard. As concerns about him grew, John was busy hiding his actions. He had purchased the spear gun since early 2003, claiming he needed it for fishing. Although he never used it, he paid in cash, leaving no evidence of the purchase. On the night he killed Anna, he slept on the sofa. The next morning, he prepared Gracie and took her to nursery just like any other day. When he came back home, Anna's body was still upstairs. He attempted to remove the spears from her skull, but only succeeded in unscrewing the metal tips. The blades remained embedded. He then dragged her body to the backyard and buried it in a shallow grave. Life continued as usual, at least outwardly. By Saturday, 4 days after Anna's death, John was still acting as though everything was normal. He followed his usual schedule, dropping Gracie off at nursery, picking her up, making her dinner, and putting her to bed. However, that evening, once she was asleep, a darker side of him emerged. He started drinking. John was preparing to commit another terrible act. This time, it was against his own daughter. When he felt ready, he took a spear gun from the garage and shot his daughter in the head, penetrating her skull. As the child was injured and screaming, John retrieved the 2 spear shafts he had earlier removed from his wife's head and returned to the bedroom. He shot both spears into Gracie's head, but she was still alive, so he removed 1 spear and shot again, finally killing her. The next morning, John returned to the bedroom and pulled the 2 spears out of her head. He then wrapped her body in a garbage bag and a tarpaulin and dumped her body at the Mornington Waste Transfer Station. He also disposed of the spear gun, the spears, some of Gracie's clothes, and toys. In the days that followed, John made an effort to maintain his deception. He accessed Anna's email account and began sending messages to her friends and family, pretending to be her. He wrote that she was happy, in love, and pregnant again with her new partner. If anyone questioned his story, John would say she had her phone. Something felt off to those who knew Anna well. The emails she sent were unusual. Their tone was inappropriate, cold, and mechanical, lacking the warmth, humor, and affection that defined her. Although the words resembled her writing style, the essence was missing. John might have thought that being far away in New Zealand would shield him and allow him to control the situation. Then, unexpectedly, the doorbell rang. Police officers from Victoria stood at his door. John appeared surprised, but remained composed. He recited a well-prepared account of events. He said Anna had left on March 23rd, returned a week later to pick up Gracie, and that he had only seen her a few times since. He claimed they had discussed separation, the baby, and their futures. He insisted that Anna no longer loved him and that the baby wasn't his. He tried to project an image of a hurt man, betrayed and abandoned. He wanted others to see him as the victim, but deep down, he sensed the instability beneath him. That same day, after the police had visited, John went to a hardware store. He bought duct tape, 2 tarpaulins, and a chainsaw. Once home, he dug up Anna's body from the shallow grave in the backyard and dismembered her. He wrapped the body parts in tarpaulin and duct tape, then drove them to the dump to dispose of them. He replaced the blood-stained mattress and got rid of Gracie's cot to keep up the facade that Anna was still alive. He continued to access her email and sent messages from her account. He even used her bank card to buy flowers for her mother, pretending they were from Anna, a disturbing act to maintain the illusion. The truth was starting to surface. A police investigation was ongoing, and the media had picked up on the story. In a shocking moment that captured the nation's attention, John appeared on live television. He pleaded for Anna to return home, asking her to call or give any indication that she and Gracie were safe. He expressed his love for them, stating how much he missed them and that he still cared. John wasn't genuinely grieving. He was pretending. At that moment, he had already given a written statement to the police, claiming he had nothing to do with Anna and Gracie's disappearance. He repeated his story to everyone. Anna had left, but the investigators didn't believe him. Although they lacked sufficient evidence to arrest him, they decided to keep him under surveillance. They followed him to Chelsea Beach, the place where John had said Anna had gone. There, he has left something in the bushes. After he left, the officers moved in to search the area. What they discovered changed everything. Hidden in the bushes were Anna's mobile phone and bank card. John had been using her items to maintain his lie. He returned to that spot regularly to create a false trail and support his deception. But now he had been caught. John Sharp was arrested and charged with the murders of his wife, Anna, and their daughter, Gracie. Initially, he maintained his innocence, repeatedly denying any involvement. However, as the investigation intensified, and the questioning became more pressing. John eventually confessed to killing both Anna, who was 41, and Gracie, who was just 20 months old. After his confession, police began a large-scale search of the local landfill based on his information. They sifted through every ton of waste by hand for 3 weeks. On July 6, 2004, they discovered the bodies. The grim reality was now clear. When asked about his actions, John didn't show any regret. Instead, he shifted the blame to Anna. He told the police that she was moody, controlling, and unhappy. John claimed that Anna prevented him from seeing his family as often as he wished and insisted that their marriage was already over. He thought he could raise Gracie alone, but later confessed he was scared of being a single father and felt overwhelmed by her crying. He also admitted that he had never really bonded with her. During the trial, a forensic psychiatrist described John as socially awkward and deeply withdrawn, unable to face his own problems. Experts believed he saw his home life as a prison from which he couldn't escape. He lacked the skills to resolve conflicts, communicate effectively, or seek help. John told doctors that during the murders, he felt like a different person, but tests showed no signs of psychosis. He was aware of his actions. The psychiatrist found that John was experiencing moderate depression, which affected his perception of reality but didn't completely impair his judgment. During the sentencing, the judge delivered a strong condemnation, calling the murders premeditated and cruel. He pointed out that John had killed his wife out of resentment and referred to Gracie as a defenseless child who depended on him both legally and morally. On August 5, 2005, the court sentenced John Sharp to 2 consecutive life terms, with a non-parole period of 33 years. In court, he sat with his head down, breathing heavily and wiping away tears, not for Anna or Gracie, but for himself. Following his conviction, more disturbing details came to light. Members of John's extended family disclosed that he had abused a young relative for 2 years, only stopping when she turned 18. The victim expressed that the most painful part wasn't just the abuse itself, but the realization that if she had spoken out sooner, perhaps Anna and Gracie would still be alive. After the trial, 3 more individuals came forward, claiming John had previously behaved inappropriately around children, both within the family and in other close settings. For years, no one spoke up. The victims, still children at the time, were too frightened. It was only after the murders that they finally found the courage to break their silence. John's relatives say that Anna was unaware of his past when they got married, but she later might have learned something. Both Anna and Gracie were buried under Anna's maiden name, Kemp. There was also a name engraved on the stone, Francis, their unborn son who never had a chance. Even though he never drew breath, he is remembered. The crimes committed by John shocked Australia and the world. A father who harmed the very people he was supposed to protect. He left behind deep sorrow and unanswered questions that may never be resolved. John resides in protective custody while incarcerated due to threats on his life from fellow prisoners. Christopher Moyer was born on May 21, 1967, into a middle-class family. He valued independence and believed that education was the key to achieving it. Although he didn't have many friends, this didn't bother him much, as he spent most of his free time studying. After finishing school, he attended college, where he developed a strong interest in computers and technology. His dream was to become self-employed after earning his degree. Beyond his career goals, he also dreamed of starting a family. By 2010, Christopher was 44 years old and had realized his aspirations. He was self-employed, working as his own boss, and happily married. He lived in a spacious house in Pennsylvania with his wife and son. He worked as a freelance computer specialist, assembling custom computers for clients from his home. His wife, Irina Moyer, was skilled in electronics and assisted him with his work. She was born on August 12, 1971, which made her 39 years old in 2010. Irina was originally from Ukraine and had moved to the United States in search of a better life. She met Christopher in April 2002 during a challenging time in his life. He was going through a difficult divorce from his first wife, with whom he had no children. This experience left Christopher longing for a large, loving family. Irina also shares this dream and hopes to build a new life in the United States. Their relationship developed quickly, and later, that same year, they decided to get married. They began planning for their future, which included moving out of Christopher's bachelor home to a place more suitable for a family. Before they could find a new home, Irina discovered she was pregnant. In 2003, they purchased a large, cozy house in a quiet suburb of Orrington. The area was peaceful, scenic, and much safer than the bustling city where Christopher had previously lived. Although the local residents formed a close-knit community, the Moyers were more reserved, choosing to keep to themselves. Over the years, neighbors described them as withdrawn and rarely seen in the neighborhood. While they didn't socialize or attend local gatherings, they weren't entirely disconnected. For example, Christopher once arranged for shared use of a snowblower with his neighbors. However, in most cases, the family preferred solving problems independently. On September 25, 2003, Irina gave birth to their first and only child, Dylan Moyer. By 2010, Dylan was 7 years old and thriving in school. Having successfully completed the first grade, he was a bright, intelligent child, and his parents were incredibly proud of him. Teachers, both from his kindergarten and primary school, regularly praised Dylan for his abilities. Much of his success stemmed from the active involvement of both his parents in his education. Being highly educated themselves, Christopher and Irina prioritized their son's learning and supported him every step of the way. While they avoided participating in the neighborhood's social life, they always attended school meetings together, demonstrating their dedication to helping Dylan succeed in both academics and life. Christopher was known as a calm, grounded individual, and his wife, Irina, shared many of his qualities. Both were thoughtful and quiet, preferring action over conversation. Their closest neighbor, Rose Radziul, knew them better than anyone else in the area. Although they were on friendly terms, Rose described Christopher and Irina as reserved, meek, and silent. Their interactions with her rarely extended beyond simple greetings and polite exchanges. Notably, Rose noticed that Christopher had a tendency to be controlling and domineering towards Irina. She noticed that Irina seemed to become more withdrawn when she was with Christopher, often avoiding communication so as not to upset him. Their son, Dylan, however, was different. Teachers regarded him as an exceptionally bright and curious boy. By kindergarten, he had a vocabulary beyond his years and often impressed or puzzled adults with his questions. Dylan's primary school teacher was particularly fond of him, recognizing his great potential early on. Instead of playing typical games for children his age, Dylan showed an interest in scientific literature, often reading during his free time. Like his parents, he was not highly social, but he maintained good relationships with his peers. Irina was described as a loving and devoted mother who prioritized her son's well-being and development. Despite her shy and unsociable personality, Christopher, similarly, was regarded as a caring father, deeply invested in Dylan's well-being. According to relatives, the family had created a warm and nurturing home environment, rooted in love for each other and their child. A few months before the tragedy, the family had even taken a trip to Disneyland, making the events of June 17, 2011 all the more shocking. At 9:40 p.m. on that fateful Friday, 44-year-old Christopher called emergency services. He calmly confessed to killing his wife and son with a baseball bat, stating that both were dead and refusing to offer any first aid. His cold and detached tone during the call was unsettling, as if he were discussing something mundane. He gave a detailed account of the crime, describing how he had killed Irina by beating her to death before attacking their son Dylan. He even supplied his personal information and the family's home address, thanked the dispatcher, and hung up. Emergency responders rushed to the Moyer family home, where they encountered a chilling scene. When no one answered the door, authorities initially suspected Christopher had barricaded himself inside and might be armed. A note taped outside listed the names and contact details of relatives, suggesting that Christopher had prepared for what was to come. Neighbors began to gather, watching the tense situation unfold. The police believed Christopher might resist arrest, but then someone noticed one of the family's cars was missing. This raised the possibility that Christopher had fled. By 2 a.m., officers entered the home through an open garage door. They proceeded cautiously, weapons drawn, but found no one alive inside. Instead, they were met with a gruesome scene. On the second floor, they discovered two bodies, 7-year-old Dylan and 39-year-old Irina. Both had suffered severe head trauma from a blunt object, their skulls brutally disfigured. Irina's body was found in the bathroom adjacent to the main bedroom. Bloodstains and drag marks suggested that her body had been moved there after the attack. A towel was also placed over her face, a gruesome detail that added to the haunting scene. Christopher, however, was nowhere to be found. Dylan's room was nearby. He was found in his bedroom with injuries similar to those of Irina. A bloody baseball bat, believed to be the murder weapon, was lying next to his body. The bat was sent to a lab for analysis, as the caller on the emergency line had predicted. The police activity quickly attracted the attention of the neighbors, especially Rose, who was close to the family. When Rose goes to find out what is going on, she is horrified by the brutal attack on the Moya family, and is even more shocked when she hears Christopher confess over the phone that he killed his own family. The police immediately questioned Rose, hoping she might have heard or seen something since she was at home during the time of the murders. However, Rose stated that she hadn't heard any screams or disturbances, only the sound of a car engine leaving the Moya residence, which she assumed was Christopher fleeing the scene. She also noted that she hadn't noticed anything unusual or any warning signs of such a violent event. Rose shared detailed information about the family, with the police being particularly interested in Christopher, who was missing. They needed to determine the direction he might have gone in and whether he had taken a weapon with him, as one neighbor had suggested. Christopher had reportedly told the emergency dispatcher that he planned to wait for the police to arrive. Yet, for reasons unknown, he was gone by the time officers reached the crime scene. Rose described Christopher as calm and introverted, adding that she couldn't imagine him committing such an atrocity. She noted that, although he wasn't very affectionate towards his wife, they seemed happy in public, and she had never seen him argue with his wife or scold his son. Forensic experts and detectives thoroughly combed the crime scene, working to piece together what had transpired. No signs of a break-in were discovered, and all the available evidence pointed to Christopher's responsibility for the attack. Fearing that his mental state had deteriorated and that he might harm someone else, authorities launched an urgent manhunt. Despite this, Christopher's actions didn't fit the profile of a typical serial killer or maniac. 2 hours after police arrived at the house, they were still searching intensively for Christopher. They tried reaching him on his mobile phone, but he didn't respond to any calls. During the investigation, security footage from a nearby camera captured Christopher's car, narrowing down the potential routes he could have taken. Road services and patrol units were alerted and stationed at strategic points in an effort to intercept him. Yet Christopher seemed to have vanished. At 12:56 a.m., a witness from a neighboring town called Hadborough rang the police. The caller, a train engineer, reported finding a body on the railway tracks. Tragically, the man on the tracks matched Christopher's description. According to the engineer, the train was unable to stop in time to avoid hitting the man. Authorities arrived at the scene and found a body, later identified as Christopher, through documents found in his possession. His pocket contained $300 in cash and car keys. A dark Toyota Camry, registered to Christopher, was located near the railroad crossing. The police concluded that Christopher had deliberately ended his life shortly after the murders. He appeared to have been familiar with the train's schedule and intentionally positioned himself on the tracks to coincide with the arrival of an oncoming train. As a result, the entire Moya family died, leaving many unanswered questions about this horrific incident. Irina's parents, along with her brother and sister-in-law, were in a neighboring town when the news broke. The police contacted them to inform them of the deaths of Irina, Dylan, and Christopher. During questioning, the family revealed that the Moyers had planned to visit them that weekend. According to their plans, Christopher, Irina, and Dylan were supposed to drive over on Saturday night. After the visit, Dylan was meant to stay with his grandparents for a few days, while his parents spent time alone together, with the grandparents later returning Dylan home. The tragic events, however, unfolded just days before this planned visit. Shortly before the tragic events, Irina's parents tried to call her, but their calls went unanswered. They were not overly concerned, assuming the family had gone to bed early to prepare for their long journey. Relatives of theirs stated that they had spoken with the Moyers on Friday morning, when both Irina and Christopher seemed cheerful and did not mention any issues. They were busy making final preparations for their trip. Neither Irina nor Christopher had a history of mental health problems, which made the tragic events even more shocking. Christopher's parents were also informed of the tragedy. His father reported speaking with him on the same day and noted nothing unusual or alarming. Christopher had mentioned extending a contract with a major client, which made him optimistic about his upcoming weekend plans and improving his financial situation. Their family had been dealing with financial struggles recently due to the instability of freelance work. Christopher had expressed concerns about potentially losing their home, but the issue appeared to have been resolved. It seemed he was simply worried that such financial difficulties could return. When friends and family were questioned, none could provide a motive for the tragedy. Christopher, described as a loving husband and father, seemed incapable of such violence. What could have driven him to kill his entire family and take his own life? Their family was private, rarely sharing details of their personal lives. The medical examiner's office conducted autopsies on Irina and Dylan. Both were found to have died from multiple blunt force head injuries inflicted with extreme force and determination. However, these findings provided no insight into why Christopher, a man with no history of depression or violent tendencies, would commit such a horrific act. Family members described Irina as loyal to her husband, leading a quiet life with minimal social interactions beyond her neighbors and her child's teachers. Their relationship was considered healthy and loving. Christopher was seen as a hard-working man who provided for his family and never displayed depressive behaviors or violent tendencies. Adding to the mystery, Christopher left no suicide note to shed light on what led to this devastating act. Key documents found in the house revealed crucial details. Investigators discovered that the family was at risk of losing their $450,000 home. Christopher had received a foreclosure notice just days before the tragedy, and they lacked the funds to resolve their financial troubles. This crushing reality may have driven Christopher to despair. It is believed that he had planned to harm himself, but in his state of anguish and loss of reason, he could not bear to leave his wife and children to face poverty and hardship. He may have convinced himself that killing his family was a way to shield them from future suffering. Despite this theory, the exact motive remains uncertain. Detectives carefully examined all evidence and consulted psychiatric experts on such behavior. Typically, such actions are linked to underlying mental health problems. However, Christopher had no diagnosed mental health illnesses and exhibited no signs of significant struggles beforehand. Relatives shared that Christopher had been deeply stressed by financial issues. Their family had previously faced the threat of losing their home in 2006, but succeeded in overcoming the challenge. The family lived modestly, but this time, the situation appeared dire and irreparable. There was no evidence to suggest that Christopher had been struggling with severe mental health issues or that he had planned the tragedy long in advance. Experts instead believe the decision may have been impulsive, driven by the overwhelming tension that Christopher had quietly been battling on his own. Christopher's father was aware that his son would never seek help from a psychiatrist, no matter how severe the situation became. There had been a suspicion that Christopher might have used illegal substances, but this was proven false. Toxicological tests confirmed that his blood was clean. However, this detail provided another clue: Christopher was not taking any prescribed medication, indicating that he had avoided seeking medical help for his anxiety or other possible issues. The forensic investigation continued, uncovering troubling evidence. The blood found on a baseball bat near Dylan's body was identified as belonging to both Dylan and Irina. Fingerprints on the other end of the stick showed it was Christopher's. Besides, footprints and additional evidence from the family home allowed investigators to piece together the tragic sequence of events. The Friday morning when the tragedy unfolded had seemed normal, but Christopher had likely already made his decision. A trip was planned for the following day, and his wife and son went to bed early that evening. Christopher, however, stayed awake, unable to sleep. At some point, he retrieved a baseball bat from the garage and waited for his family to fall into a deep sleep. He did not want to make noise or raise suspicion. Christopher's actions suggested that he wanted to carry out his plans swiftly, though calling it humane would be a stretch. He first entered the bedroom he shared with his wife and attacked her suddenly. The first blow to her head caused fatal injuries, leaving her unable to scream or resist. Christopher proceeded to strike her multiple times, breaking her skull. He likely believed that ensuring her death quickly was necessary. Irina succumbed to internal bleeding within minutes, and forensic evidence showed that she had no defensive wounds, indicating she had been caught completely off guard. Next, Christopher turned to his son, Dylan, who was asleep in his room. He killed him in the same manner, with the boy unaware of what was happening. Afterward, Christopher dragged his wife's body to the bathroom adjacent to their bedroom, leaving a blood trail behind. The reason for this act remains unknown. Additionally, he covered her face with a towel, a gesture often associated with remorseful killers who cannot bear to look at the consequences of their actions. After the murders, Christopher did not immediately call emergency services. Instead, he wrote a note listing the contact information of family members, presumably to assist authorities in reaching them. He also sent a text message to his father, apologizing. At the time, his father had no idea what had occurred and did not understand the gravity of the message. The violent events were entirely unexpected and shocking, even to those closest to Christopher. After bidding farewell to his family and leaving behind clues, Christopher called 911 to confess his actions. However, he did not wait for the police to arrive. He needed to act quickly to position himself at a reachable section of the train tracks before it was too late. This urgency may explain why he left no explanation for his actions in his note. He also chose not to leave a will, possibly because the family possessed very few valuables. Only 2 cars remained. Their most valuable property had already been lost, and they had no savings. A key document found in the house provided critical insight into the double murder. It revealed that the family had been struggling with financial problems for an extended period. Christopher's freelance work was insufficient to support a family of 3. Years earlier, he had faced the risk of losing their home for the first time. Thankfully, they managed to make the necessary payments in 2006 and kept their house. However, their financial situation deteriorated further in 2010. By September of that year, debts were mounting once again. Family members and neighbors suspected that the financial troubles were linked to money and real estate. Unfortunately, Christopher had kept his struggles private and did not ask for help, so no one realized how severe their situation had become, not even his relatives. Psychiatric experts concluded that Christopher decided to kill his family when he realized they were unable to escape their financial difficulties. In his distorted reasoning, he believed that taking their lives was the only way to spare them from a life of poverty. His disturbed state of mind led him to view this act as a twisted form of mercy. After the investigation was concluded, the case was closed. Irina and Dylan Moyer were buried together in Pennsylvania, near a city nearby. There is less information available about Christopher's funeral, but it is known that he was buried separately, far from his wife and child. Irina's family insisted on this, as they believed it was unfair to bury the murderer with Irina and and Dylan.